If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Illinois is shaped like a giant flint arrowhead, its point thrust deep into the south between the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. At its tip, the two rivers merge in a great confluence. Here, north and south meet, and in the triangle of land at the arrowhead's point called Egypt, the customs and ideas of north and south were interwoven. John A. Logan was a product of this sectional intermingling. As historian James Pickett Jones explained in that quote, "One can't understand the life of John A. Logan without understanding where he came from. That can be said about most, if not all, historical figures, but it becomes even more so with Logan as the state of Illinois was split over the American Civil War, nearly as badly as the whole country. Logan embodied the mindset of many Northerners, especially those from Illinois." Dr. John Logan came to the United States with his family in the first decade of the 19th century, settling in Maryland. However, he and others moved west, across the Mississippi River, settling in Perry County, Missouri. Although Dr. Logan engaged in various ventures in business, agriculture, and politics, he never left the medical field that his father taught him. In 1824, Dr. Logan moved back across the Mississippi River into Illinois, settling in Brownsville. There he met Elizabeth Jenkins, a woman born in North Carolina, living at times in South Carolina and Tennessee before traveling to southern Illinois, also known as Egypt. They married and moved up the Big Muddy River to a 160-acre farm and began their family. Their first child was named John Alexander Logan, born on February 9, 1826. He would be one of 11 children. Young Logan was born into a family of Jacksonian Democrats. His father dabbled in politics, with his uncle Alexander becoming lieutenant governor of Illinois. Young Logan's house was filled with Jacksonian ideals that his father espoused, and he undoubtedly heard many political discussions within the house's four walls, even attending some political rallies when his father ran for state assembly. Logan was educated in the town of Brownsville, with classes being held in the courthouse. However, his schooling was intermittent, because his father would win a seat in the state assembly in 1836, and that meant Logan, being the oldest child, would need to take on some responsibilities around the farm, which he did. He did, however, find time to float his homemade flatboat down the Big Muddy River, learned how to play the fiddle, and became one of the best riders in the area. One neighbor recalled, "John in his early life became an expert rider and was ever ready to ride a race. I have witnessed races at the Logan tracks many times when John, as a boy, was a rider of one of the horses and never saw him excelled." One day, Logan's father gave him orders to run the squirrels out of the corn. In a playful yet dutiful way, Logan posted a sign on a nearby tree that read, "I give notice to all squirrels to keep out of the cornfield. If they don't keep out, they will be shot." Dr. Logan attempted to supplement his child's education by teaching him himself, Dr. Logan being a well-educated man. But by the time Logan turned 16, his father realized that he needed a much more advanced schooling, and sent him to nearby Randolph County to the Shiloh Academy. He and his 14-year-old brother would stay there for 3 years, learning reading, writing, arithmetic, and getting their first lessons in Latin. Logan began to demonstrate a natural ability at public speaking at Shiloh Academy as well. Logan, many years later, remembered the non-scholastic time he had at the academy. "I well remember in my boyhood days when the same number of men and boys at my college would have been a terror to all hen coops, melon patches, apple and peach orchards, without a picket fence, shotgun, and bulldogs." In 1845, Dr. Logan brought his 2 sons back home and hired a private tutor for the family to teach the growing number of children. The next year, a war with Mexico seemed certain, and Logan's father, being a war Democrat, was elected to the state assembly. Logan desperately wanted to join the approaching war, but had to wait until 1847 when his father returned from Springfield. The 21-year-old Logan enlisted, and in the company elections, the lieutenancy came down to himself and James Provost. Logan challenged Provost to a foot race, a card game, or a fist fight to find out who would become the first lieutenant, but a formal election saw Logan become the second lieutenant of the company. He would be a part of the 1st Illinois Infantry Regiment. On June 14th, orders came for the regiment to move. They marched to steamboats destined for Fort Leavenworth. There, the regiment settled into camp life, monotonous camp life. One of his friends wrote, The captain takes but little responsibility upon himself, which makes the other boys from different counties so hopeless in trying to do anything or make any kind of a show. But I hope the day is not far distant when John will be captain of the company, for he justly deserves the station. If John Logan was out of the company, I would pray to be at home, but he is the same John here that he is at home. He has nothing, but if I need it, I get a share, and that without a murmur. On July 7th, the regiment got the orders to march to Santa Fe and occupy that location. The march began through the Kansas prairie land and into more arid terrain. By September 7th, they spotted their first town in a month, Las Vegas, not far from Santa Fe. Their occupation of Santa Fe mimicked their duty at Fort Leavenworth. In October, the colonel of the regiment took half of the unit to El Paso, but Logan was not among them. He was now adjutant of the post and got added responsibilities. He also busied himself by studying Spanish, something that would stay with him for most of his life. In the winter of 1847, a measles outbreak infected the garrison, with Logan contracting the illness. 9 of his comrades in Company H died, but he eventually recovered by the spring of 1848. That year also brought the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that ended the Mexican War. In July, the 1st Illinois was ordered back to their state. By September, they reached Fort Leavenworth, and by October, they were back at Alton, Illinois, where their military experience began. Upon his return, Logan expressed a want to enter politics, even though his father wanted him to be in the medical field. In 1849, Logan easily won election to county clerk. He used the money he got from being county clerk to enter law school in 1850. He traveled to Louisville University, one of the best frontier law schools. In February 1851, he graduated and wrote to his father, "You can tell all who are anxious for my attendance at our court that I am certain to be there if life lasts and money holds out." Upon his return, he ran for prosecuting attorney of the 3rd Judicial District, which he won. At the age of 25, he began his law career, moving to Benton, Illinois and Franklin County. He would only hold the position for a year, resigning to run for the State General Assembly like his father. In 1852, he began campaigning. However, his appearance did attract some accusations. His straight black hair and dark complexion led many to claim that he had Indian ancestry, and this accusation would persist throughout his life. He was a playful politician, at one point to instigate a wrestling match between himself and the town's children. While the children were playing marbles, he walked by and kindly kicked some of the marbles out of the ring. The children chased after him, knocked his hat off, and a good-hearted rumble ensued. He was a natural speaker. One of his biographers explains, beginning at Shiloh Academy, Logan developed an oratorical style. His voice was sonorous and audible, even to the last ranks of a large crowd, so powerful, in fact, that he was able to shout down hecklers, a quality necessary in the rough and tumble of Egyptian politics. Logan's political platform was based upon his Jacksonian Democratic upbringing and appealed to voters in southern Illinois. He was anti-black, saying that he would fight for a bill that would exclude free blacks from Illinois. He wanted enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. He also supported a railroad policy that would benefit St. Louis and subsequently Egypt, rather than a state policy that he felt benefited central and northern Illinois. At the age of 26, Logan was elected with a large majority, expanding his political career beyond southern Illinois. He traveled to Springfield to take his place in the Assembly in 1853. He was joined by 58 other Democrats, 16 Whigs, and 1 Free Soiler. The Assembly put Logan family friend Stephen A. Douglas in as senator, and placed Logan in 2 committees, the Judiciary Committee and the Committee on Banks and Corporations. During this session of the Assembly, Logan did as he promised and fought against a state policy regarding railroads, and wanted a railroad focused on the southern end of the state. He failed in his fight, a fight that had been raging in Illinois for years. He fought against a prohibition bill that would outlaw alcohol, because, as he said, Egypt was a place where the use of intoxicating drinks seems more natural than the use of water. However, the most significant and most hotly debated bill was one introduced by Logan himself, the exclusion bill that would prevent free blacks from entering Illinois. His support of this bill and his eloquent speeches made him the spokesman of Egypt. When he spoke, people saw him as representing the whole section of the state, but this did come with some problems. Not all were in favor of such a bill. The state constitution already prevented blacks from voting, and joining the militia, and a provision did stop the immigration of free blacks into the state, but that provision had been ignored. Logan brought it up again. The debate for the bill began in February, with Logan standing and calling those who opposed the bill abolitionists, and alleging that if the bill did not pass, it would result in intermarriage and social and political equality. He claimed that being surrounded by slave states meant that his section of the state would be impacted most by black immigration, alleging that it would reduce the morals of the area. In an address to the assembly, he stated, "Nor can I understand how it is that men can become so fanatical in their notions as to forget that they are white. It has almost become an offense to be a white man. Unfortunate were these gentlemen in their birth that they could not have been ushered into existence with black skin." The bill passed 45 to 23, making it a crime punishable by a $100 fine for an African American to enter the state, and if they didn't leave the state or couldn't pay the fine, then they could be arrested and forced to work off the fine and trial costs. Although it is debated as to how well enforced it was, there are cases of African Americans being arrested under this Logan law. The session ended with Logan being known throughout the state. He returned to Benton to resume his law practice, but was called to Murfreesboro because his father was dying of an abscessed liver. His father soon passed, and Logan was morose. The bond between father and son was strong, and Dr. Logan's support had put Logan into the position he now found himself. Logan's raised status and name value brought lots of business to his law practice. One of his most famous court cases involved a murder trial of a prominent Union County citizen. Logan defended the citizen. Sensing that the courtroom was too hostile toward his client, he got a change of venue. The new courthouse sat in a field of sheep. When Logan was delivering his summation, a dog chased a sheep into the courtroom. The quick-thinking Logan grabbed the sheep to rescue it from the dog, and holding the animal in his arms, likened his client to the sacrificial lamb of the Old Testament. Logan was convincing, and his client was found not guilty. Logan soon ran for prosecuting attorney for the 3rd District Court, which would expand his influence over Egypt. He rode the circuit and loved every minute of it. Being in a courtroom allowed him to tell stories and hone his public speaking abilities. When Stephen A. Douglas returned to Illinois from his stint in Washington, Logan was on stage with him, sitting behind the little giant, as the senator spoke about popular sovereignty and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Logan supported Douglas and the act. Riding around the 3rd District, he loved visiting Shawneetown, the county seat of Gallatin County. His old friend from the Mexican War, John Cunningham, was there as the registrar of the Shawneetown Land Office. Logan reminded Cunningham that he had promised Logan his daughter in marriage, but it had just been a joke because his daughter was just 8, but now she was 17 and in school in Morganfield, Kentucky. When she came home, her father introduced Mary to Logan, and it seems as though Logan fell in love with her instantly. From June until November, Logan made regular trips to spend weekends with her. Although she was first uncertain about marrying Logan, Mary accepted his proposal, and they were to be wed on November 27, 1855. It was a small wedding, and the two were married by Logan's old law partner, Judge Parrish, with only a few friends in attendance. At first, Mary accompanied Logan on the circuit rides around the district, even reading law reports, and helped him with his paperwork. However, in early 1856, she found out she was pregnant and had to refrain from joining her husband on the strenuous trips. 1856 was a big year for Logan because of his status within the Democratic Party in southern Illinois. He had to build support for Stephen Douglas to become president. Douglas didn't win the nomination, but that didn't stop Logan from supporting James Buchanan as president and John C. Breckinridge as vice president. Logan helped campaign for Buchanan as president and for himself as a member of the state assembly. Both won their elections. At the end of 1856, the Logans brought their first child into the world, named John Cunningham Logan. William Bissell was elected governor of Illinois in that same election, an election that saw him go against the Democratic platform for supporting the expansion of slavery through popular sovereignty. Bissell had been a Democrat, but switched to the Republicans during the debate over Kansas and Nebraska. The Democrats in the Assembly saw him as a traitor, and when the session began, they sought an orator to attack the new governor. They chose Logan. He said, "This, sir, is my home. Beneath the green and hallowed sod of this beautiful prairie state lie the bones of my aged and venerable father. Shall I stand quietly by as one of the people's representatives and see her public morals corrupted, her constitution violated, her honor tarnished, and give no sound of alarm? Other than attack the new governor, Logan's time in the assembly was fairly uneventful. He returned to his law practice and took part in the case for which he is most remembered. In Shawneetown, the Democratic Party was broken into factions, and Colonel James Slough was in a heated feud with other Democrats over the issue of slavery. When the other faction, led by John E. Hall, published an editorial bashing Slough, the feud picked up steam. Slough's son, Robert, returned from West Point to find his father lambasted by the newspaper, the Marion Intelligencer. Robert approached Hall and another Democrat named Bob Ingersoll and shot Hall dead. Robert didn't attempt to escape and remained there until the authorities arrested him. The prosecution hired Logan. Logan's mind wasn't entirely on the case. He had to leave his sick wife, and his child would become sick during the trial. At first, he had high hopes, but in August he confessed, "The defense have got 4 abolition doctors here from the North who are going to swear that he is crazy as a bedbug, and God knows what effect it will have on the case." Slough pleaded temporary insanity and was acquitted on all charges, being one of the first acquittals based on insanity in the state. When Logan returned home, he found Mary had recovered, but the child was getting worse and passed away in September. Mary bore the brunt of the devastation and begged Logan not to go back to the circuit, but he went anyway. She wrote to him that, "Politics, if you will allow, can destroy our happiness together. It will rob you of all domestic feelings and make you miserable except when in the society of men engaged in the discussion of political subjects." But politics wouldn't stop for Logan. In 1858, the Democratic congressman from his district decided not to run and named Logan his successor. Mary's mind changed about Logan's political aspirations, namely because she felt that being a U.S. congressman would give them more time together, rather than him being on the circuit. Logan and Mary began to travel around the state campaigning for Logan and other Democrats, particularly Stephen A. Douglas, running for a U.S. Senate seat from Illinois. Douglas was running against Abraham Lincoln, a one-time U.S. congressman and former state legislature, and now a prominent lawyer in the state. Lincoln and Douglas agreed to a set of debates all over Illinois, and 2 of them would be in Egypt, at Jonesboro and Alton. Logan would be at both of those debates, if nothing else, to gain political prestige from Douglas and for Douglas to get more votes from Egypt because of his association with Logan. After the Jonesboro debate, Douglas traveled to Benton, the Logan's hometown, where he made an impressionable speech to gather a crowd. Logan continued to travel with Douglas while he was in Egypt. In September, the Republicans finally put an active candidate against Logan, named D.L. Phillips. On the campaign trail, Logan argued that the Republicans were in league with abolitionists, and if the Republicans got elected, then a mass migration of African Americans would enter the state, specifically Egypt, because of its close proximity to the slave states of Kentucky and Missouri. One newspaper described Logan's campaigning. "Logan is a popular speaker and seems to have espoused, certainly so far as this district is concerned, the popular cause. In him abolitionism finds a foe, who will be satisfied only with war to the knife and knife to the hilt. His hate for that creed is bitter, and no man knows how to evince a bitter spirit more completely than John A. Logan." The Alton debate was held, and Logan was in attendance, but the benefactor of Douglas's presence was the Democrat running in that district. On November 2nd, Election Day, Douglas won the Senate seat, and Logan handedly won the congressional seat. Logan got 15,878 votes, as opposed to the Republican candidate that got 2,976. He won all but one county in the district, and in Johnson County he won 1,158 to 6. However, the session didn't start until December 1859, so he had to wait a year to take office, so he began to ride the circuit. That winter, Mary gave Logan good news. They were going to have another child. By the fall, they had their new child, a girl named Dorothy. The child was too small to stand the trip to Washington, so Logan had to go on without his wife, but he promised to send for her as soon as possible. As he traveled to Washington, he made a stop at Harper's Ferry. It had been less than a month since John Brown's raid on that town. Logan wrote to his wife, "There is more danger of a rupture in this government now than there has ever been before." In Congress, the first order of business was to elect a Speaker of the House, but since no major party held a majority, it became a fight. During it, William Kellogg stood up and accused Douglas of conspiring with Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Tribune, to get Republican voters to vote for Douglas. During the accusations, Logan got up to speak, saying, "I tell the gentleman now, since he has refused this morning to bring forward his proof, that from this time forth I shall never notice it. I scorn to notice it any further, and the reason for it is this. I made a charge once in the legislature of the state of Illinois, and I stood up and did prove it, when called upon for proof, and did not shrink from responsibility, and like a spaniel cower." After the heated words, Kellogg and Logan rushed at one another, but their respective sides held them back from landing any blows. After the near scuffle, Logan continued, "Every fugitive slave that has been arrested in Illinois, or in any of the western states, and I call Illinois a western state, for I am ashamed longer to call it a northern state, has been made by Democrats. In Illinois, the Democrats have all that work to do. You call it the dirty work of the Democratic Party to catch slaves for the Southern people. We are willing to perform that dirty work. I do not consider it disgraceful to perform, dirty or not dirty, which is in accordance with the laws of the land and the Constitution of the country." From that day on, the Republican press in Illinois called him Dirty Work Logan. When asked if he would support a Democratic nominee in 1860 whose views on slavery differed from Douglas, Logan answered, "I am now about 28 years of age." He was actually 33. "I was born a Democrat, and all my life I have learned to believe that the Democratic Party in National Convention never do wrong." Applause and laughter from the Democratic benches and galleries. "I have never known the Democratic Party in National Convention to endorse a platform that was not consistent with my views. I came here as a Democrat, and I expect to support a Democrat. I may differ with the gentleman on this side of the House in reference to issues that are past, but God knows that I have differed with the other side from my childhood, and with that side I will never affiliate so long as I have breath in my body." The deadlock over the speakership continued on into December. Mary asked her husband to come home for Christmas, but Logan explained that if he left before a speaker was chosen, he would be charged in the Illinois papers with neglect of duty. So he must stay. Mary asked him about the possibility of disunion, to which Logan wrote, "I hope and pray that such may never be the case. I don't as yet apprehend danger of such a thing at any time soon, but if these troubles continue, the destruction at some day is inevitable." After numerous votes and withdrawing of candidates, the Republicans finally got a majority by putting forward William Pennington of New Jersey. It was February 1st, and the long debate over the speakership had finally ended. Logan's first few months in Congress were uneventful except for his part in the speakership debate. He tried to get a bill put forward to reorganize the district courts of southern Illinois, but the speaker wouldn't recognize him. His anger came out in the debate over the Utah Territory and polygamy, where he proposed dividing the territory in half, thinking that the Mormons couldn't have a majority in that instance. When Congress discussed outlawing polygamy in the territories, the Democrats, including Logan, balked at the thought of outlawing it, not because they were in favor of polygamy, but because they feared it would set the precedent for outlawing slavery in the territories. Soon the Democratic National Convention would be held in Charleston, South Carolina, to vote on a candidate for the presidency in 1860. Logan and fellow Illinois Democrats left Washington for South Carolina, determined to nominate Stephen A. Douglas for that position. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Before Logan left for the Democratic National Convention in Charleston, South Carolina, he wrote to Mary, "I am not entirely sanguine of success, as there is the most infamous combination against our man, and if they find he is about to be nominated, they will try to break up the convention." Logan wasn't a delegate, but went anyway, bound and determined to get Stephen A. Douglas in as the Democratic presidential candidate. He worked closely with fellow Illinois Congressman John McClernand to make that happen. It was a tumultuous convention, especially the debate over the party platform. When the Southern delegation couldn't get protection for slavery in the territories as a plank in the platform, one by one the Southern delegates left. Logan and other Douglas men denounced the Southerners as violent and unable to compromise. The convention broke up and would meet again, this time in Baltimore, Maryland, the next month. Logan reported to his wife, "I have worked at Charleston until I am nearly crazy. Our fight there was terrible. Such a combination has never been met by any man on earth as was met at Charleston." When the Republican convention in Chicago nominated Abraham Lincoln, Logan wrote to his wife, "There is a great desire on the part of everyone to get home soon, since the Republicans have nominated Abe Lincoln. They are anxious to commence the fight at home." Logan returned to Congress but ventured to New York to help campaign for Douglas, since the New York delegation had been rumored to be switching their votes to another candidate for the president. He spoke at the Cooper Institute, and it generally went very well. When back in Washington, a humorous debate occurred on the congressional floor about the lighting of Washington streets. Logan asked, "I want to know why a gentleman who travels so much at night as the gentleman from Kentucky desires to travel in the dark." The Kentucky congressman responded, "Those with whom I keep company are honest, and it is not necessary to have them guarded, but perhaps in the gentleman's country, for I believe he comes from Egypt, he may want protection at night." At the convention in Baltimore, another split happened, but the delegates that remained nominated Logan's pick, Stephen A. Douglas. Despite Logan's success, the Democratic Party was falling apart in front of a united Republican Party. Logan soon had to go home to secure his own nomination for a second term in Congress, which he received, due in no small part to his wife. Mary laid the groundwork for his nomination, keeping her husband's name on the people's ears and working hard to illuminate his actions in Congress. Logan campaigned for himself and for Douglas that fall, but Douglas made it hard on him. In a speech in Norfolk, Virginia, Douglas answered a question about secession in the event of a Lincoln victory. Douglas said he would support maintaining the laws in the whole United States, which horrified many Southerners. Logan fumed at having to clean up such a statement to portray Douglas in the best of light. One observer said Logan was storming around, ugly and full of fight. When the Democratic newspaper in Benton, Illinois, Logan's hometown, decided that Douglas wasn't going to win and began supporting Lincoln, Logan halted a bunch of talks to try and change the mind of the newspaper editors. He was unable to convince the brothers who ran the newspaper to change their stance and offered to buy them out. They set the price at $700, and Logan offered $550. They at first declined, but when a crowd began to gather around to watch the negotiations, the brothers felt the hostility in the air and accepted Logan's offer. The brothers then went to the State Journal in Springfield and published a response to Logan. "Mr. Logan may have succeeded in crushing us for the time being and throwing us out of employment, but these acts of his will have a voice that will speak in louder tones than we can utter. Go on, Mr. Logan, put down free speech, close up the avenues of free thought, gag the press if you can, trample underfoot the sacred guarantees of the Constitution, but you can never stop the march of truth." In the election, Logan easily won his seat in Congress, and Douglas won Egypt, but not the election. Republicans took over the state of Illinois, with Richard Yates becoming its governor. Logan went to Congress for the next session, bringing his family with him. Secession was the topic on everybody's lips in Congress. President James Buchanan believed that secession was unconstitutional, but opposed coercion to bring them back into the Union. Logan believed the same thing, but while Buchanan remained inactive, Logan felt that, in such an event, the president had a duty to be active in getting the country back together. On December 20th, during the congressional session, word came that South Carolina had adopted an ordinance of secession. The Illinois House delegation stood united against South Carolina's actions, stating that the Union must and should be preserved, although they disagreed as to how to go about doing that. Logan blamed extremists on both sides, fire eaters and abolitionists, for the secession movement. He wrote, "The election of Mr. Lincoln, deplorable as it may be, affords no justification or excuse for overthrowing the Republic. We of the Northwest, having as much, if not more, at stake than any other section, cannot stand silently by while the joint action of extremists are dragging us to ruin." The congressmen, still in Washington, as state by state left the Union, attempted to compromise with the secessionists, offering protections of slavery in the southern states and in the territories, and enforcement of the fugitive slave law. Logan, as a compromiser, supported these measures. To fight back against Northern opposition to protecting slavery in the territories, Logan stated, "It has been said on this floor by Republicans that the God of nature has so arranged the soil and climate of those territories that slavery cannot go there. Why, if by the soil and climate is slavery excluded from the territories, in God's name, why insist on impracticable legislation by Congress? Logan, as well as other Illinois congressmen, visited with President-elect Lincoln, and by March, Logan returned to his home state to handle a crisis developing there. The Republicans who took over the state were going to redistrict to help move out Democratic congressmen like Logan. Plus, Southern Illinois, or Egypt, was attempting to find its place in the secession debate. Many disagreed with secession but opposed coercion. Others saw coercion as the only way to bring the country back together. Logan had to navigate those tumultuous political waters. To remain with his constituents, he moved from Benton to Marion, getting his wife and daughter settled into their new home. He began to ride the circuit, picking up clients because of his stint in Congress. When news of the firing on Fort Sumter reached Egypt, Logan was torn, like most of his constituents. He wasn't supportive of coercion still. He thought a compromise could be worked out. Despite the division, a group of Marion County citizens adopted the Marion Resolutions, which stated that if the border states left the Union, then they would need to divide the state of Illinois and join the Confederacy. Logan was not a part of the meeting. He told his father-in-law that he believed what Marion did was treasonous, but also said that he would suffer his tongue to cleave to the roof of his mouth and right arm to wither before he would take up arms against his Southern brethren, unless it was to sustain the government, and that if war was prosecuted solely for the purpose of freeing slaves, he would not ground his arms, but would turn and shoot them north. From April until June 1861, Logan's views were in the shadows, not making any public statements, but this also made people think that Logan was on the side of the South, with multiple newspapers accusing him of being a traitor to the United States. When some Illinois men marched south to join the Confederacy, Logan was accused of being their leader, though he wasn't. It wasn't until June 18, 1861 that Logan made a statement. Near Springfield at a military post called Camp Yates, Colonel Ulysses S. Grant was having difficulty getting his men to remain in his regiment when their enlistment ended. John McClernand and Logan came to Camp Yates to lend a hand. Grant welcomed McClernand, who was a Union man, but Logan was suspect because of his strong ties to Southern Illinois and his pro-Southern leanings. Nevertheless, Grant allowed both men to speak. Logan spoke after McClernand, saying, "You can't fall out now. If you go home to Mary, she will say, 'Why, Tom, are you home from the war so soon?' 'Yes.' 'How far did you get?' 'Mattoon.'" The crowd roared with laughter. Grant remembered that Logan's successive speech breathed a loyalty and devotion to the Union which inspired my men to such a point that they would have volunteered to remain in the army as long as any enemy of the country continued to bear arms against it. They entered the service almost to a man. President Abraham Lincoln called for a special session of Congress for July 4, 1861. Before he left for Washington, Logan promised to enlist in the Army upon his return to Illinois in August. His wife, Mary, moved to Carbondale so she could be on the Illinois Central Railroad to have better communication with her husband by telegraph. She would relay to his constituents his views of the war and keep them updated as to his status. On July 3rd, before the session started, Logan went to visit Lincoln, accompanied by Henry W. Blodgett, an Illinois Republican. Logan told the president he wanted to help raise a regiment and wanted a commission. Lincoln told him that he could do better service if he remained in Congress. Nevertheless, as Logan left, Lincoln promised him the authority to raise a regiment when he left Congress. He may have been willing to join the army, but he still wanted a compromise, but despaired as he learned of the attitudes of his fellow congressmen. He wrote to his wife, "I can see no prospect of any adjustment of our difficulties. There is no one who will attempt to do anything. The Kentucky and Missouri men all came here as solid as the Republicans for war, except Burnet. So you see that when from the South we get war, there is no use for Northern men to sacrifice themselves by standing out against the storm. I shall act as consistently with my record as I can under all circumstances." On July 13th, a huge debate raged as a resolution was put forward to expel Missouri Congressman John Bullock Clark Sr. Just days before, as leader of the Missouri State Guard, he had attacked United States forces at the Battle of Carthage in Missouri. Logan opposed his expulsion, but he was outvoted, leading to the Missouri congressman's expulsion from the House. As the congressmen debated, two armies were converging on one another in Northern Virginia. Knowing a battle was close at hand, Logan and fellow Democratic Congressman from Illinois, William Richardson, got permission from General Winfield Scott to follow the army to Manassas Junction. He promised his wife that he would stay a safe distance away, but he soon forgot that promise and attached himself to the 2nd Michigan Infantry. Near Blackburn's Ford, a small engagement erupted, and when the 12th New York Infantry charged, Logan joined with it. One of his biographers described the scene. He was a strange sight on the battlefield, dressed in civilian clothes, with a plug hat pulled down tightly on his head. He picked up a musket and took a few shots at the Confederates. One observer remembered, he was a man of alert and vigorous frame, swarthy complexion, long and heavy black mustache and black eyes, and by language more forcible than polite. He strove to rally the men. Logan did little fighting and spent most of his time under fire assisting wounded to the rear. He wrote to his wife, "I have just returned from 3 miles this side of Manassas, which is Bull's Run, and was in the fight with a musket, and came out without a scratch. I came back black with powder and bloody from carrying off wounded soldiers. I am now glad that I went, as I am not hurt, and safely say that no man who saw me on the field will say that I wanted courage. I feel very much inclined to go into the army, not for the heart in the contest, but that if the government is to be preserved, to help do it." The special session ended on August 6th, and Logan prepared to return to Illinois. He wanted to make a speech in Marion, and his wife made preparations for the speech and for the crowd. When he arrived, Logan knew that his speech would disappoint some and encourage others, but he was confident that his oratorical skills could tame the crowd. He said, "The time has come when a man must be for or against his country. The Union once dissolved, we should have innumerable confederacies and rebellions. I for one shall stand or all with the Union, and shall this day enroll for the war. I want as many of you as will come with me. If you say no, and see your best interests and welfare of your homes and children in another direction, may God protect you." Grant would later comment, Logan's popularity in this district was unbounded. He knew almost enough of the people in it by their Christian names to form an ordinary congressional district. As he went in politics, so his district was sure to go. Enough men enlisted on the spot to create a company, but many people felt betrayed by Logan. One of his brothers and his own mother chastised him for abandoning the pro-Southern leanings they had endorsed for years. Logan began to stump for volunteers to join his regiment, the 31st Illinois Infantry, which he would be the colonel of. Many of the recruits in Southern Illinois were concerned that the war would become an abolitionist war to end slavery. Logan assured them that they would be enlisting to preserve the Union, not end slavery. He even went so far to say that if it did come to that he would personally lead them home if it became an abolitionist crusade. The 31st formed at Camp Dunlap, and then officers and men traveled by rail to Cairo, to Camp Defiance to continue training. Monotony soon crept into the camp, and some of the men mutinied, stacked arms, and refused to do any of their routine duties. When Logan heard about it, he said, "Stacked arms? The devil they have. Well, I'll give them enough of stacking arms." Logan went into the camp, found the mutineers, and put them under guard while they stacked and unstacked arms for 12 hours. The Mexican War veterans in the ranks were looked to for guidance, and the officers were given copies of Hardee's Light Infantry Tactics, a manual created by a Georgian years earlier who was now a Confederate general. Mary pleaded to her husband to let her come with him. She wrote, "Greater than all is the unnatural and piercing feelings our families feel about your being in the service. It makes it awful to be with them while you live, and when I think of many things you said and affirmations you made last spring in your speeches against war, I can trace the foundation of their feelings. They will never feel right the fact of your having to join with Republicans under Lincoln's administration to fight the South. They will ever keep alive the bitterness which they will not hide." Logan relented, and Mary came to Cairo for the months of October and November. On November 6th, the orders came for the 31st and the other units under Ulysses S. Grant's command to move south aboard transports. Confederate General Leonidas Polk commanded forces at Columbus, Kentucky, with some troops across the Mississippi River at Belmont, Missouri. Grant determined to attack at Belmont and debark his troops about 2.5 miles upriver the next day. When the attack began, Logan's troops were in the center, but were soon put on the extreme left. Artillery shells and musketry scared many in the ranks as they pressed forward, pushing the Confederates as they moved. When the regiment was ordered to charge, the blue troops began to engage in a hot firefight with the defending rebels. In the charge, Logan's horse was killed and another bullet shattered his pistol. He led his men on foot, sword in hand. The Confederates scattered and the Federal soldiers began ransacking the Confederate camp, resulting in a chaotic scene of disorganized units pillaging. Grant ordered the camp burned to try to restore order. Meanwhile, Polk sent troops across the river attempting to cut Grant's force off from their boats. Finding they were about to be cut off, Grant ordered his troops to withdraw, with Logan's regiment leading the way partly. The men made it back to the boats, and by 4 p.m., the boats shoved off. All the while, Confederate infantry fired on them from the riverbank. Both sides claimed victory after the battle, with the casualty list for the Union and the Confederacy about the same. Logan and Grant's forces returned to Cairo satisfied with themselves. Logan was welcomed back by his loving wife, to whom he recounted the entire battle. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Logan won praise for his actions at the Battle of Belmont. John McClernand wrote highly of him in his report, and his men became more attached to their commander, starting to call him affectionately Blackjack. The months following Belmont were monotonous for the men. They attempted to entertain themselves in many ways within the confines of the camp, but temptation lurked just outside of the camp. When a private approached Logan for leave to meet his sister when she arrived in Cairo, Logan granted it but was suspicious of the young man, so he detailed 2 soldiers to follow the young man. The next morning, the detailed soldiers found the young man drunk, put him under arrest, and brought him to Logan. Logan lectured him and then ordered him to unearth a stump as punishment. Logan was technically still a member of Congress. He hadn't resigned yet. When Logan requested to go to Washington and New York to speed along supplies destined for the regiment, it was granted, and when he got to the capital, he began to rekindle friendships, but didn't take part in any House debates. He wrote, "I cannot get pay for member of Congress and colonel at the same time, and therefore I am not willing to do the duties of both without remuneration. I shall not resign my commission in the army after getting the boys into it, and to be candid with you, I had rather fight anyhow now. I feel desperate. Only for you and Dolly do I want to live. I have no other friends outside of my regiment, and with them I shall cast my fortune. Either death or glory shall be mine." He would officially resign from Congress in April 1862. In early 1862, Confederate forces dominated Kentucky to protect the state of Tennessee from invasion. On January 19th, Union General George Thomas won a victory on the eastern end of that long Confederate defensive line at the Battle of Mill Springs. Grant tested the western end of that line at the Battle of Belmont, but was unable to budge Confederate General Leonidas Polk. Now, Grant was about to implement a plan to devastate the western flank of the Confederates. On February 2nd, Cairo bustled with 15,000 troops boarding transports for their journey south, Logan among them. The gunboats and transports steamed up the Tennessee River to their first objective, Fort Henry. It sat just 12 miles from its sister fort, Fort Donelson, on the Cumberland River. Heavy rains flooded Fort Henry, making its position untenable. Grant debarked his infantry downriver from the fort. Scouts brought back news that the fort had capitulated, and a loud cheer went up by Logan and his men. However, most of the Confederates had abandoned Fort Henry and made their way to Fort Donelson. Just a handful of men remained to surrender. Grant optimistically declared he would capture Fort Donelson 2 days later on February 8th. However, that plan got derailed. He would divide his force for their march on Donelson, with part of it going by boat down the Tennessee River and up the Cumberland River, while the majority trekked overland and a small group remained at Fort Henry. Grant, outnumbered, attempted to lay siege to Fort Donelson. Attacks yielded no result, so he resolved to try and pound the Confederates into submission using his gunboats. On February 15th, the Confederates sallied forth from their works and attacked the Union right flank. Logan and the 31st Illinois fought desperately as the flank began to collapse. While shouting encouragement to his troops, a bullet slammed into his left shoulder and he slumped in the saddle. His men urged him to go to the hospital in the rear, but he refused, settling for getting his wound bandaged, and then he returned to commanding his troops. The 31st held on and fought defiantly against the assaulting Confederates, but they were running low on ammunition, and it was about this time that Logan suffered his second wound, a bullet to the thigh. With himself being wounded and his men almost out of ammunition, Logan withdrew his troops. Logan finally gave in to receiving help at the division hospital. He laid down exhausted from the fight, hunger, and blood loss. He seemed so weak that some physicians were concerned about his recovery. Grant arrived on the scene in enough time to help push back the rebels and keep many of them from escaping, which was their overall plan. On the 16th, the Confederate garrison surrendered. Mary Logan wrote to her husband upon hearing the good news of the victory that, "Be good, my darling. I mean be religious, and don't for your soul's sake be so profane. In the army a man must be careful, or he will forget his dependence on a higher power." The shoulder wound was the most serious. The thigh wound was a flesh wound, but he had a third injury caused by a bullet hitting his holstered pistol, driving it into his ribs, nearly breaking a few. It was first reported that Logan had been killed in the fight, and Mary read it in the paper and was determined to go to him. She found out he was only wounded, and she persisted to see her husband and take care of him. When she got to Cairo, she was forbidden to get on a military transport as a civilian, but she ran into John McClernand's quartermaster, and he allowed her on one ship as a member of his family. The ruse was for naught, because the boat's captain had been a client of Logan's, and Logan had cleared him of manslaughter years earlier. Mary was welcomed aboard. She got to Donelson and found her husband, watching over him for 2 weeks until he could be moved. Logan was transported back home to fully recover, under the watchful eye of Mary. In late March, Logan received a promotion to brigadier general. Before he could fully heal, the call of battle brought the newly minted general south. He still couldn't put his arm into his coat because of the wound, but he was determined to be back with his men. He arrived at Fort Donelson on April 7th. He and his regiment traveled by steamer to Pittsburg Landing, the site of the Battle of Shiloh, but missed the battle. Nevertheless, Logan got to see the carnage left in its wake. Now back in the army, he now needed a command befitting a brigadier general. Grant gave him command of a brigade consisting of the 8th, 18th, 30th, and his own 31st Illinois, along with the 12th Michigan. Grant was reduced to second in command when Henry Halleck came from St. Louis to take field command. This unsettled Logan, who had grown close to Grant. The large force now at Pittsburg Landing lumbered southward to Corinth, Mississippi, the Confederate fortified town. At first, the division Logan's brigade was placed in had no division commander. Logan assumed that role for one day until Henry Judah took that place. The army moved at a snail's pace, covering just a couple of miles in a day's march, and every evening was filled with building breastworks to throw back a Confederate attack that never came. A frustrated Logan wrote to Mary, "I have been almost tempted after this fight is over, if I get through alive, to resign, though I do not know what to do. Judah is a perfect sapsucker, no sense at all." Logan's brigade was in the reserve on the approach to Corinth, but William T. Sherman, on the right of the army's movement, requested a brigade from the reserve to put on his flank. It was granted, and Logan's brigade was chosen. Logan's men performed admirable work, driving the Confederate skirmishers in. On May 28th, Logan heard train whistles blowing and loud cheers erupting from Corinth. The speculation was that the rebels were being reinforced. Some railroad men from Logan's group bent down and listened to the Mobile and Ohio Railroad, claiming they could discern loaded from unloaded trains just by the sound. They claimed that the unloaded trains were coming in, and loaded trains were leaving. Logan agreed with their assessment and took that information to Grant, who told Halleck about the theory. But Halleck wouldn't believe it. He felt that the Confederates were being reinforced. Halleck soon found out how wrong he was when the Union Army entered the town a short time later, abandoned by the Confederates. It was a hollow victory for Logan, but he soon had a new assignment. He was to capture Jackson, Tennessee. He arrived at the town on June 7th and captured it with only minor enemy resistance. He became the post commander, while his overall commander, McClernand, remained at Corinth. Logan quickly understood the monotony and anxiousness associated with garrison duty. As the commander, he dealt with soldiers looking to get into trouble to break up the regular chores, and he received repeated reports of rebel guerrilla bands all over his district. Logan needed to discover the real threats and discount the imaginary ones. His men, when not in camp, were thrown out in all directions, attempting to stop the raiders, both real and imaginary. Fellow Illinois Democrat John McClernand was just one step ahead of Logan in their military journeys, getting higher positions in the Army first. Logan's slowness in adopting coercion as a way to solve secession allowed McClernand to rise up higher in politics as well, because McClernand favored coercion earlier. Logan didn't like to be commanded by McClernand, and in late July the rift between the two men began to widen. McClernand ordered most of his troops away from Jackson and moved south about 30 miles to address a possible threat. Logan protested that if most of his force left, this would leave the railroad open to attack, but obeyed his orders. Just as Logan thought, with his garrison diminished at Jackson, the rebels burned a significant bridge and caused a lot of damage. Logan began communicating directly with Grant, who told McClernand to move Logan back to Jackson. McClernand was furious, and the two Democrats kept the telegraph wires hot, jousting with one another, with Logan requesting troops and asking how he could be expected to guard such a vast area with so few soldiers. Not only were guerrillas and McClernand giving Logan problems, the civilian population hated the occupying army. He knew that civilians were helping the Confederates, and he began to require all of them in his area to take the oath of allegiance. Some did, and just went right back to helping the enemy, but one man absolutely refused to take the oath, and Logan confronted him. The old man said he had 5 boys in the Confederate Army, and he would rather rot in prison than take the oath. The determination impressed Logan, and the old man was released. That duty was wearing on Logan. He described Jackson as, "There never was such a hole as this. It is insulting and impudent," and declared, "I am nearly worked to death and must get relief soon, or I will break down. I am almost tired of living in the Army, though I dislike to quit unless I could do it at some more proper time." Logan requested a 20-day leave, which he received, heading north to Illinois. Politics welcomed him back to the state, hoping for endorsements for candidates for his old congressional seat. However, Logan refused to endorse anyone or even get involved in politics. He wrote, "I express all my views in politics when I assert my attachment for the Union. I have no other politics now, and consequently no aspiration for civil place and power." When a crowd requested a speech, he said, "Party lines and partisan feelings should be swallowed up in patriotism." He spent his 20-day leave with his family and then returned to a chaotic scene. McClernand returned to Illinois to recruit, and this brought added responsibility on Logan, in addition to an increase in raids. September was a month of rest for his troops, and that lull persisted into October. However, the politics present in September hit an all-time high. President Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, stating that on January 1, 1863, that all slaves held in bondage in Confederate-controlled territories, with some locations excluded, would be free. Soldiers remembered Logan's promise earlier in the war that if the conflict became about emancipation, then he would lead his men back to Illinois. But Logan didn't lead a mass exodus of soldiers. He encouraged his men to fight to preserve the Union, but a few men did desert. By November, Ulysses S. Grant was preparing for the Vicksburg Campaign. Logan and his command would travel southwest to the Mississippi-Tennessee line, and Logan would be promoted to commanding a division in the 17th Corps of the Army of the Tennessee, with James B. McPherson being his corps commander. That army pushed into Mississippi and crossed the Tallahatchie River, but raids by Confederate cavalry reduced Grant's communication with vital points to the north. So the army turned around, with Logan and his new division going into winter quarters around LaGrange and Memphis. Logan found that staying idle was the worst possible situation for an army. Desertions were up. He wrote, "It takes all my time to keep the men in camp. The people, President and all, have gone crazy, and I shall hold on to my command a while yet and see if all will not become sane again. If not, I shall probably leave the army." Logan's Donelson wound bothered him, and he lay in bed too weak to command his troops. When Mary found out about his illness, she rushed to his side. She did more than nurse him back to health. She carried his messages to subordinates and even reviewed the troops. By February 15, 1863, Logan was ready to take command. Mary went back to Carbondale, Illinois, and Logan prepared his troops to move south. They boarded transports and steamed down the Mississippi River, debarking north of Vicksburg on the west side of the river. Work on a canal to bypass the city to approach the fortified location from the south was already being constructed, and Logan's troops helped in that process. In mid-March, Logan received a promotion to Major General. It took 2 attempts by Abraham Lincoln putting forward his name to Congress to get the promotion approved, but Logan became a Major General, dating from November 29, 1862. In late March, Grant ordered the canal project ended, and Logan's division did forays around the Yazoo River north of Vicksburg. The Emancipation Proclamation took effect 3 months earlier, and it not only declared slaves held in Confederate-held territory free, but it also allowed for the enlistment of African American men into the United States Army. This became a hotly debated topic in the Army, and Logan heard the talk. By early April, he was ready to declare his stance on the subject. He told his troops that he had been educated to support slavery, but that the war had opened his eyes, and said that slavery must be destroyed. He said in part, "We must hurt the rebels in every way possible, so we'll unite on this policy of enlisting African Americans into the Army, putting the one who is the innocent cause of this war in the front rank, and press on to victory." One of his biographers described his change in mindset. Logan's shift of position can be traced to 2 factors. He was no dedicated abolitionist, but by 1863 he had concluded that everything, even slavery, should be sacrificed if necessary to save the Union. He also had politics in mind. His eye on post-war politics, Logan was growing certain that a narrow Egyptian view of national affairs would not win statewide office. Though his popularity might decline in Egypt, and even there his enemies were more noisy than numerous, every step away from rigid Egyptian democracy brought him praise from northern and central Illinois. His name, long anathema in Springfield, Freeport, and Rockford, was now greeted with cheers. By late April, Grant put his plan to strike at Vicksburg from the south into motion, landing Logan's and other troops at Bruinsburg and pushing inland to Port Gibson. At Port Gibson, Logan was on the Union right as they pushed the Confederates, with Grant's infantry coming from the south and a Union cavalry raid led by Benjamin Grierson moving through Mississippi. The Confederate commander at Vicksburg, John Pemberton, was torn in multiple directions. Logan led the way into Mississippi, poised to strike at Jackson. At Raymond, Mississippi, Logan's division engaged with the Confederates, offering resistance against a Union push to Jackson. Logan's men handled the battle almost entirely themselves, but near the end of the battle reinforcements came up to finish off the job. During the battle, some cooks near the front became scared at the large battle happening around them and skedaddled. One of them, pot in hand, ran headlong into Logan, who asked where he was going. The cook responded, "Old General, I've got no gun, and such a snapping and crackling as there is up there I never heard before." Logan won the battle and pressed on in a northeastwardly direction. When a messenger was captured from Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston to Pemberton, Union forces found that Pemberton was coming out of Vicksburg and heading east, trying to attack Sherman's corps. Grant dispatched both McPherson and McClernand's corps north. The 2 armies found one another at a place called Champion Hill. It was May 16th when musketry and artillery fire sounded around Champion Hill. Logan was on the Union right, making good headway against the rebels, and even threatened the route of retreat for the enemy. But before it could be exploited, the Union center was being hard pressed. Troops were taken from Logan's flank and added to the center of the Union line. During the climactic part of the battle, Logan shouted just before a bayonet charge, "We are about to fight the battle for Vicksburg." He then turned to his old regiment, the 31st Illinois, and said, "30 Munsters, remember the blood of your mamas. We must whip them here, or all go under the sod together. Give 'em hell." The battle was won, and Pemberton moved back towards Vicksburg. Charles A. Dana, essentially a spy for the Union War Department, to report on the Union Army's movements and its generals, wrote this of Logan. "In the beginning of a fight, he was one of the bravest men that could be, saw no danger, went right on fighting until the battle was over. Then after the battle was won, his mind gained an immovable conviction that it was lost. It was merely an intellectual peculiarity. It did not in the least impair his value as a soldier or commanding officer. He never made any mistake on account of it. Heroic and brilliant, he is sometimes unsteady. Inspiring his men with his own enthusiasm on the field of battle, he is splendid in all its crash and commotion. A man of instinct and not of reflection, his judgments are very apt to be right. On the whole, few can serve the cause of the country more effectively than he, and none serve it more faithfully. Grant's army chased after the retreating rebels, defeating them at Big Black River Bridge, and pursued them to the fortifications of Vicksburg. A few attacks were made on the 19th, but they weren't able to capture the city. Flushed with victory and knowing that Joseph E. Johnston's Confederate army was somewhere behind him, Grant decided to attack on May 22nd at 10 a.m. Logan led his division into battle, but even the daring Logan couldn't break into the Confederate fortifications. Logan's division, as well as all of McPherson's corps, occupied the Union center. They began throwing up fortifications of their own to combat the rebels. The siege lines got so close to one another that one of Logan's men threw a hardtack cracker into a Louisiana regiment's trench with the word starvation written on it. A few moments later, the hardtack came back with the words 40 days rations and no thanks to you. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. During the siege of Vicksburg, Logan became one of the Army's greatest characters and perhaps, outside of Grant, its most popular leader. He flatly refused to remain in the rear, and his headquarters, called Siege Battery Logan, was thrust forward, belligerent, and perhaps ostentatiously toward rebel lines. His first headquarters structure was unsuitable, and Logan had another built of timber filled with dirt and containing loopholes for defense. It was the highest point in Logan's line and the most advanced point in Grant's army. Though under constant fire, Logan spent most of his time in it, despite a glancing wound in the thigh. He seemed determined to share the burden of the siege with his men. Logan was on the front lines during the day, but he often went to Ulysses S. Grant's headquarters at night, officially to see Grant. But he really went to spend time with a newfound friend, Grant's medical officer, William L. Duff. One soldier came across Duff and Logan sitting around a table with a bottle of whiskey, and Logan playing the violin. Siege life grew monotonous, but Logan kept his men busy by digging tunnels to the enemy's lines in order to explode them and cause a gap in the Confederate fortifications. The tunnel with the most promise was set by Logan to explode on June 25th. Logan positioned a brigade of men ready to charge into the breach. The mine exploded and Logan's men, as well as Logan, rushed to the crater. The Union soldiers got slaughtered in the crater. Logan, just a short distance away, remarked, "My God, they are killing my bravest men in that hole." The attack ended in a failure, but one thing did come out of the attack. The explosion sent an African-American man into Union lines near Logan. The man was brought to Logan, and the general asked him how high he went. The black man guessed 3 miles. Logan would hire him as a servant. As July dawned, Confederate Commander John Pemberton requested a meeting with Grant to discuss surrender terms. Grant brought a few generals with him to the meeting place between the two lines. Logan was one of the generals accompanying Grant. Pemberton formally surrendered on July 4, 1863, and Logan's division was chosen to lead the army into the city, a high honor. Grant also named Logan the commander of the city. As post commander, Logan's troops were responsible for guarding the prisoners and keeping order, as well as taking care of the needy citizens. Logan chose one Union officer, a Union chaplain, and a respected citizen to go through the town identifying the needs of the city. Logan only held the position for 16 days. The siege being over, Logan felt comfortable enough going home to fully recover. His Donelson wounds had been bothering him for months, and with a lull in the war for the Army of the Tennessee, Logan went north. The last time Logan returned to Illinois, he was relatively silent. This trip would be different. He seems to have become more optimistic about his decision to join the war against the South. In southern Illinois, in front of a gathering crowd of 5,000 people, he stated, "I do not propose to make a political speech. I am not canvassing this part of the country for the purpose of promoting any political organization. Since I have been in the Army, I have at all times eschewed politics. But what opposers to the war were doing was unholy, unrighteous, or unconstitutional." Turning to the Northern Peace Democrats, he declared, "They forget that Jeff Davis and his crowd are doing anything wrong. Oh no, they are honest people, they all go to church. But we war Democrats are a set of wicked devils. I am for peace as much as any man can be, but I will tell you what sort of peace I am for. I am not for a piece of a country." He went on, I don't want any man to understand that I am striking at any party. I only strike at individuals who are trying to ruin the country. I want my former Democratic friends to tell me how they know I am an abolitionist. Why, I tell you the reason. It is because we are in the Army and Abraham Lincoln is president. That is the reason. These men don't know enough, or don't want to know, that Abraham Lincoln, because he is president, don't own the government. This war ain't fighting for Mr. Lincoln. It is fighting for the Union, for the government. On the subject of slavery, he said, "That machine has gone up, played out. There is no doubt of that, and the people of the North are not responsible. The Southern gentlemen have done it themselves." Returning to the subject of politics, he explained, "I told you today that I did not intend to make a political speech and would belong to no political party until the war is over. I meant just what I said. I am only for the Union, right or wrong. I have learned in the Army the best lesson I have ever learned in the world. I have stood for hours under the hottest fire, where bullets were flying like hail and cannonballs were whizzing past my head every moment. I have seen Republicans stand by my side, and the Democrat and the abolitionist. I have seen the Democrat shot down and buried in the same grave with the Republican and abolitionist. They are all fighting for the same country, the same ground, the same Constitution." This speech and others were printed in pamphlet form and sold widely around the Northwest in the Army. He toured around Illinois, promoting the Union and the Army, gaining so much popularity that Republicans from Illinois asked Abraham Lincoln to extend his leave so he could visit towns not yet visited and make that same speech. Lincoln got the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, to extend Logan's leave into August. When Logan returned to Vicksburg, he would no longer be the post commander. His veteran troops were needed for other duties. He made forays into Louisiana and deeper into Mississippi looking for Confederate resistance, but came back to Vicksburg to perform garrison duty. Meanwhile, the other major Union army in the Western Theater, the Army of the Cumberland, had been defeated at the Battle of Chickamauga and was besieged at Chattanooga. Grant was sent to the east to help lift that siege, along with William T. Sherman. Grant's new role as commander of all forces in that theater of operations moved Sherman to the command of the Army of the Tennessee. This left Sherman's old corps, the 15th Corps, without a commander. Francis Blair acted as its temporary commander, but Grant wanted Logan as its permanent commander. Grant and the Secretary of War filled out the necessary paperwork, and Logan became the 15th Corps commander. Logan left Vicksburg destined for Chattanooga, with cheers from his old command on his ears. When he reached Chattanooga, he found the siege had already been broken, and the 15th Corps was preparing to march to Knoxville, Tennessee, to lift the siege of Knoxville, to save Ambrose Burnside's command in that city. Logan declined to take command of the corps while it was on campaign, asking for Blair to command it until it returned to Chattanooga. Logan remained at Chattanooga until the corps returned. When it did, he moved the corps to Scottsboro, Alabama, making it his headquarters. He immediately reviewed the troops, numbering 16,973 when they all made it to Alabama. Logan used his corps to guard the fords and bridges across the Tennessee River, eventually moving his headquarters to Huntsville, Alabama. Confederate raiders burned a few bridges in his district, but Logan rebuilt them. In mid-January 1864, Sherman launched an offensive from Vicksburg to Meridian, Mississippi. Grant ordered Logan to send troops in a feint against Rome, Georgia, to prevent the Confederate Army of Tennessee at Dalton, Georgia, from sending troops to aid the Confederates in Mississippi. In February, Grant desired an offensive made by George Thomas and his Army of the Cumberland at Chattanooga toward Dalton. Logan supplied Thomas with additional troops, but Thomas's offensive was short, although it did send the Confederates back into Dalton. Logan's troops returned to Logan, and he kept patrolling the Tennessee River, guarding it against the Confederacy. In March, Grant took formal command of all Union forces and named Sherman as his replacement in the West, and James B. McPherson, the 17th Corps commander, would take command of the Army of the Tennessee. Grant recommended Logan to take command of the 17th Corps, the unit in which his old division operated. Blair was to take command of the 15th Corps. A back and forth persisted as to the change in command, and finally, Logan wrote an appeal asking to be kept as commander of the 15th Corps, that he had come to know his subordinates well and would not like to be transferred. With that, the decision was settled, and Blair took command of the 17th Corps. As the 15th Corps commander, Logan adopted a corps badge, like the Eastern Army's corps possessed. When the 15th Corps marched into Chattanooga months before, it saw the 12th Corps from the Army of the Potomac. The 12th Corps' badge, to identify them on the battlefield, was a 5-pointed star. A 15th Corps soldier asked if they were all generals. The 12th Corps soldiers replied that it was a Corps badge and asked what was theirs. The Westerner patted his cartridge box and said 40 rounds in the cartridge box and 20 in the pocket. Logan heard the story and made a cartridge box with 40 rounds engraved on it, the Corps' badge. In April 1864, a feud developed between Logan and the Army of the Cumberland commander George Thomas. Thomas required officers from the Army of the Tennessee to obtain passes from his headquarters to travel on the Nashville to Chattanooga Railroad. When Logan heard about this, he fumed and demanded equal authority over military railroads. Sherman stepped in and fulfilled Logan's request and told Thomas that any perceived slights were unintentional. By early May, Sherman was ready to launch his campaign to capture Atlanta, Georgia. Logan moved his corps to Chattanooga, then slipped into Georgia. Sherman possessed 3 armies: the Army of the Ohio, led by John Schofield, the Army of the Cumberland, commanded by Thomas, and the Army of the Tennessee, led by McPherson. Logan and McPherson were on Sherman's right, and Sherman used that army as his strike force, first sending it west of Dalton to get into the enemy's rear near Resaca, Georgia. The town was only lightly defended when McPherson arrived on its outskirts, but didn't pursue further. Reports at the time insisted that Logan argued to let the 15th Corps attack the town, but that McPherson refused to allow that to happen. However, Logan refutes that story in his report at the time and in his post-war accounts, saying that the town appeared too fortified to attack at that time. Nevertheless, Sherman moved his entire army group to Resaca. Joseph E. Johnston, the Confederate Army commander, did the same. As the Union Army encircled Resaca, Logan's corps was on the extreme Union right. Logan's aggressiveness paid dividends for Sherman's efforts. Logan noticed a rise that would allow him to fire into the city, onto the bridge across the Oostenaula River, the Confederates' escape route, and on the Confederate position themselves. Logan used a combination of infantry and well-placed artillery to secure a hold on those hills, opposite the Confederate forces of Leonidas Polk. Polk attempted to regain or at least push the 15th Corps off that rise, but were unable to do so. Logan's actions and fear of the Union cutting them off from Atlanta convinced Johnston to retreat from Resaca. Logan wrote to Mary, "My corps all behaved gallantly and received great credit by all who saw the charge and fight. When Johnston will make a stand I do not know, but I think at the Allatoona Mountain." The Union Army continued to pursue Johnston's troops deeper into Georgia. During the advance, Logan lost his artillery chief, Major Charles Stolbrand, being captured by Confederate cavalry when examining the terrain for a good location for his cannons. The campaign, though thoughtful, was an arduous one, and Logan seemed apprehensive about the future. He wrote, "I may fall, and if so, I shall fall on a just cause, and will be only one man added to the list of those who have laid down their lives in pure devotion to their country. I want you to know that if I do not survive, I have deposited with Colonel John C. Smith, Chief of the 15th Corps, $10,000 that he will pay you on demand." Soon Logan and the entire Army group would be locked in another deadly struggle as they marched south. As Johnston pulled back, Sherman swung to the west to outflank his adversary. Logan and the Army of the Tennessee were the farthest western unit in Sherman's force, approaching Dallas, Georgia. Heavy skirmishing punctuated their push to Dallas, and when they stopped, Sherman's troops formed a huge wall from Dallas in the west to Pickett's Mill in the east. Engagements erupted at New Hope Church in the center and Pickett's Mill on the left, before an attack finally materialized on May 28th in front of Logan, with Confederate General William Hardee launching his troops against the quickly fortified Union-held area. Seeing the battle storm on the right, Logan galloped to Walcott, one of his brigade commanders, waving his sword in the air, his red undershirt showing beneath his torn uniform tunic. Disorganized troops converged on Logan, asking for their regiments and officers. Logan thundered at them, "Forward and yell like hell." But the first Iowa's guns still in rebel hands, Logan mounted a counterattack by rallying Harrow's division to take the battery. He jumped his horse over the works, followed by shouting troops racing into a hail of rebel fire. Logan, struck in the left forearm by a rebel ball, saw the men claim their guns and hurl the enemy back. Sherman wanted the Army group to move east to the railroad to stay on that main supply line, but Confederate skirmishers forced them to stay put. Sherman, McPherson, Logan, and one of Sherman's staffers went to an exposed area to see if they could detect the Confederates' intent when a rebel bullet scraped Logan's arm and hit the staffer in the chest. However, the staffer wasn't killed. The bullet hit a memorandum book and only broke some of the staffer's ribs. When the Confederates finally withdrew, Sherman gave chase, pursuing them to outside of Marietta, Georgia at Kennesaw Mountain. The Army of the Tennessee was now on the Union Army's left, confronting the formidable elevation. However, Sherman didn't try to move around Johnston's flank this time. He opted for an assault. Sherman made numerous statements about not launching frontal assaults against a well-entrenched enemy, but as the days drug on, and the rains diminished his ability to outflank Johnston, a frontal attack seemed more promising. One of Sherman's biographers described his decision as such. What finally convinced him to attack straight ahead was his perception that the enemy and our own officers had settled down into a conviction that I would not assault fortified lines. I wanted, therefore, for the moral effect, to make a successful assault against the enemy behind his breastworks. Logan reported a different reason. He allegedly told Don Piatt, an officer and author, that Sherman was jealous of Grant getting all the attention in the Eastern Theater, and he wanted to win headline space for his army group. Logan supposedly heard this from Sherman himself at a meeting in which Sherman read a newspaper featuring Grant. This statement by Logan, if true, shows evidence of a rift between himself and the Army Group commander that widened as the campaign continued. At Kennesaw Mountain, Logan's men charged up the steep slopes, with Logan staying at the front during most of the attack. Logan's men allegedly made it further up Kennesaw Mountain than any other troops. Despite his brigade's persistence, the Confederates held on to their position, and Sherman continued his flanking tactic. Johnston pulled back to the Chattahoochee River, and Sherman used the Army of the Tennessee again as a mobile strike force. Logan and McPherson headed east and made a lodgment on the Atlanta side of the river, forcing Johnston to pull back to the defenses of Atlanta. When the Confederate Army moved across the river, President of the Confederacy Jefferson Davis replaced Johnston with John Bell Hood, a general known for his aggression. It's around this time that Logan wrote to his wife expressing a disgruntled attitude towards Sherman's favoritism for West Pointers. He wrote, "My command was first on Kennesaw and in Marietta, but that will make no difference unless I was a West Point officer. Sherman is a strange man and seems to fight a portion of the army at a time, which is certainly of disadvantage to us. I should not complain, however, for I am sure that he has given me enough to do, and he has certainly said as little about it as he possibly could in his dispatches." Logan and the Army of the Tennessee moved toward Decatur and then approached Atlanta from the east, arriving there on July 20th and 21st. Word came that the Confederates might be evacuating the city. Logan was chosen to lead the pursuit. His men came out of their hastily thrown up entrenchments and advanced, but met resistance, indicating that the Confederates weren't evacuating. Logan and McPherson observed the rebels within an artillery range of the enemy. When an artillery shell exploded 20 feet from where the two generals were standing, Logan turned to McPherson and said, "General, they seem to be popping that corn for us." Logan's men pulled back into the entrenchments, ready for their next orders. The 17th and 16th Corps of the Army of the Tennessee were on Logan's left, and on July 22nd, Confederate General William Hardee launched a massive assault against those two units. The fight became desperate, and McPherson ordered Logan to send reinforcements to that sector. Soon, Logan and Sherman heard the horrible news that McPherson had either been killed or wounded. He and his staff had been surprised by the rebels cutting their way through the Union left flank and was shot. Sherman named Logan as temporary commander of the Army of the Tennessee. Logan then named Morgan L. Smith as his own replacement in the Corps and dashed off for the left flank to stem the tide of the attacking enemy. The battle became fierce around a rise called Bald Hill. Logan, always near the front, encouraged his men forward. However, Hardee's attack wasn't the only one. Confederate General Benjamin Cheatham, temporary corps commander of Hood's old corps, now launched his own attack against Logan's right flank, where his old corps was located. The 15th Corps was pushed back, and an artillery battery was lost. Logan hurried across the battlefield to that front. He took off his hat and waved it in the direction of the enemy, yelling, "McPherson and revenge, boys!" Eventually, he was able to plug the hole in the line and retake the artillery battery. Logan helped save the day, and the Army of the Tennessee increased their defensive works, but the Army needed a new permanent commander. Despite Logan's military career, Sherman had his reservations about naming him as the Army commander. Years after the war, Sherman claimed that he didn't make Logan the permanent commander of the Army of the Tennessee because the Army of the Cumberland commander George Thomas threatened to resign if Logan was chosen. This allegation is highly suspect, because why would Thomas resign because another officer became commander of an army not of his own? True, Logan and Thomas had a little feud from a few months earlier, but would that have been enough to convince Thomas that Logan didn't need the permanent command? Years after that claim, Sherman stated that Thomas was concerned about Logan dispersing his corps too broadly, and that may hurt the integrity of Thomas's line. Logan wasn't a West Pointer, which is apparently Sherman's main reason for not keeping him as the permanent commander. In this regard, Sherman critiqued Logan for not understanding the logistics or grand strategy, a very arguable statement. Plus, the only time that Logan could exert control over grand strategy was the day or two he had been commander of the Army of the Tennessee. In his campaign to capture Atlanta, Sherman wanted to move the Army of the Tennessee around to the west side of the city. Sherman claimed that since Logan hadn't been trained in logistics at West Point, the maneuver that was to be performed would be extremely difficult, and Logan may bungle the movement. At 3 p.m. on July 24th, 2 days after the Battle of Atlanta, where Logan took command of the Army, Sherman made his decision. The new Army commander would be Oliver Otis Howard. Howard commanded the 4th Corps of the Army of the Cumberland. It was an odd choice, to say the least. Both Howard and Logan held commissions for Major General from the same date, November 29, 1862. Howard had proven himself as brave in battle, having lost his right arm at Seven Pines in 1862. The 33-year-old Howard commanded all Union forces at the Battle of Gettysburg on the first day when 1st Corps Commander John Reynolds was killed until Winfield Scott Hancock made it to the field. However, as one historian explained, perhaps no Union general in the Civil War consistently found himself in such predicaments on battlefields than Oliver Otis Howard. Few commanders north or south had been routed from more battlefields in 24 months of war than General Howard. Sherman would write later of Logan's abilities. General Logan had taken command of the Army of the Tennessee by virtue of his seniority and had done well, but I did not consider him equal to the command of 3 corps. Between him and General Blair there existed a natural rivalry. Both were men of great experience, courage, and talent. Both were politicians by nature and experience, and it may be that for this reason they were mistrusted by regular officers like General Schofield, Thomas, and myself. Howard took over the reins of the Army of the Tennessee, and Logan went back to command of the 15th Corps. Logan, as temporary army commander, had already begun and nearly accomplished the movement of marching the army behind Thomas's Army of the Cumberland, north of Atlanta, and positioning them on the west side of Atlanta. This would cut the Confederate Army off from any reinforcements that could come up from Alabama, or any supplies emerging from that region. Hood lashed out again, this time near a building called Ezra Church. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Logan and his 15th Corps barely settled into their position around Ezra Church when John Bell Hood launched another attack at the Army of the Tennessee. Commanding the high ground, Logan threw back repeated attempts to dislodge them. The 15th Corps commander stayed near the front lines, encouraging his men and rushing additional troops to weak areas in an attempt to hold on to the rise. Some of his men ran into the church and grabbed the pews to fashion a makeshift breastwork against the rebel bullets. Logan exposed himself to danger throughout the brutal fight, leading his men to a great victory. However, he was skeptical about how his actions would be viewed by his commanders. He wrote to Mary, "Whether I will get any credit for these fights I cannot tell, but guess not. Were I from West Point, these 2 fights would make me more reputation than Sherman ever had before this campaign, but I do not expect it." A week later he wrote, "On the 28th, I had the hardest fight of the campaign with my corps alone, and gained a great and complete victory, but will get no credit for it. West Point must have all under Sherman, who is an infernal brute. As soon as this campaign is over, I think I shall come home. At least I will not serve longer under Sherman." Logan's wrath wasn't only directed towards Sherman, he also lashed out at Northern peace Democrats. He wrote, "From the papers it seems that at home there will be trouble yet, though I hope not. The people are crazy. Just now, when the rebels are almost exhausted, they cannot increase their armies any more, and if we can only get the proper quota to fill our ranks, it must be crushed, yet at home they cry of peace." Most of August passed fairly quiet for Logan, but by the end of the month, the Army of the Tennessee was on the move again, this time cutting the two rail lines running into Atlanta from the southwest and the south. Logan's men made it to the first railroad and began destroying the track, taking the rails, heating them up in the center, and twisting them. The next objective point was Jonesboro. On the approach to the town, most of Logan's men discovered a house. An older woman saw the Union soldiers and ran inside. The blue-coated soldiers went into the house and found the woman wasn't there alone. Her daughter laid in bed with a newborn baby girl. The child's father had been killed fighting in the Army of Northern Virginia. One of the soldiers proposed baptism for the child, and the women agreed. So they went to go get a chaplain. A Union doctor was also on call to check on the family. When Logan came within sight of the doctor, the surgeon said, "General, you are just the man we're after." "For what?" Logan questioned. "For a godfather." Logan went into the house and held the child while the chaplain went through the ceremony. The child was christened Shell Anna, and Logan left a gold coin as a gift. He also ordered his men to leave some of their rations with the family to hopefully see them through for a while. The 15th Corps led the Army of the Tennessee's attack on Jonesboro. When it crossed the Flint River, Logan ordered it to dig in the best it could, as there was a large Confederate force in the town. On August 31st, Confederate General William Hardee, in command of 2 corps, attacked Logan's men but couldn't dislodge them. The next day, Logan moved against the Confederates, but the rebels threw back every attack. Nevertheless, other troops captured the rail line between Jonesboro and Atlanta, forcing John Bell Hood to abandon the city and finally bringing the giant campaign to a close. Logan moved the 15th Corps closer to Atlanta and rested them, as they had campaigned for nearly 4 months without a respite. Logan now turned his attention to the North, as far as politics were concerned. The presidential election would take place in November, and Abraham Lincoln was now running against the president's former general, George McClellan. Logan refused to endorse anyone while he was in the Army, which prompted one of his friends to write, "Will you refuse both party and country when they jointly ask your voice in this election? In God's name, dear Logan, by all your hopes for your country and yourself, let not the democracy ask your arm and be refused. That party gives us a rational and a national platform. Will you refuse to give your voice in behalf of our honorable soldier, patriot, Democrat, and statesman McClellan? P.S. Lincoln has gone to the devil. Illinois will give McClellan 35,000 majority." According to Logan, years after the war, President Lincoln asked him personally to return to Illinois and stump for him, especially to the people of southern Illinois. Logan made no mention of who he would support once William T. Sherman and Oliver Otis Howard gave him leave to return home, but Mary anticipated her husband would promote Lincoln. Mary even made a bet with one of Logan's brothers, who thought John would stump for McClellan. Mary won the bet and received a span of mules that were used to pull Logan around Illinois delivering speeches on behalf of Lincoln. His first speech was on October 1st in Carbondale, Illinois. He thundered in his impressive voice that he refused to act with or support any man or set of men, no matter by what name they may be called, that are not in favor of exhausting all the men and means under the control of the government in order to put down this accursed rebellion. When I find the leaders of the party I acted with betraying the trust of the people reposed in them, when I find them repudiating the doctrine of Jackson, who was for hanging traitors to the highest tree, and for preserving the Union at all hazards, either with blood or without it, I am compelled to follow you no farther. I cannot go with you in the precincts of treason and disloyalty. I will act with no party who is not in favor of my country, and must refuse to support the nominees of the Chicago platform. In another speech, Logan clarified his support for Lincoln. I believe Mr. Lincoln is a devoted patriot, struggling honestly to preserve this country. He has done some things that I have not thought best, but that he has tried faithfully to sustain the Constitution is a position no man can gainsay. If Lincoln should die, this man Johnson has brains enough to run the machine. He is a patriot, a soldier, and a statesman. I am for these men whether I have a friend left in the Democratic Party or not. The numerous speeches he made could have resulted in what he complained of as an inflammation of the throat. Despite his ailment, he asked Sherman if he could return to his command. Sherman was getting ready to march to Savannah, Georgia from Atlanta on his famous march to the sea, and told him that he couldn't overtake his command and that he had better rest. Logan rested for a little while in Illinois, then made a few speeches, and then went to Washington, D.C. After a few days in the capital, he traveled to City Point, Virginia, the headquarters of General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant. The two talked as old friends, but there was something on Grant's mind. George Thomas, who had been sent to Nashville to prevent the Confederate capture of the city, wasn't moving as fast as Grant wanted, and now the capital of Tennessee was besieged by the Confederate Army of Tennessee. Grant dispatched Logan with a mission to travel to Nashville, and if Thomas hadn't moved by the time he arrived, to take command of the army there and throw back the rebels. Logan moved out on December 13th for the West, first going to Washington, D.C., then Cincinnati and Louisville. In that Kentucky city, Logan found that Thomas had moved, and done more than that, he had smashed Hood's army and scattered it south of the city. Blackjack Logan wrote back to Grant of the situation and told him he would remain in Louisville until he heard new information. Grant recalled him to Washington, where Logan had a meeting with the president. Then he went by steamship to Savannah, recently captured by Sherman. Logan got incredibly seasick from the voyage, but once he regained his composure, he took back command of the 15th Corps. That corps was divided for its movement into South Carolina, with part of it going by water to Beaufort, while the other half went overland with the rest of Sherman's army. As the army moved through South Carolina, they were harassed by Confederates attempting to cause as much damage to the Union juggernaut. The fighting was constant, but it was mostly light, except for a few occasions, especially at water crossings. Soon Logan's men pushed all the way to the outskirts of Columbia, South Carolina. Logan's 15th Corps were the first into the city. Logan claimed that the citizens greeted them with buckets full of alcohol, which led to order breaking down rapidly. That night, although the exact origins are a mystery, fires broke out. Logan, Sherman, and Howard all tried to stop the flames from engulfing the city, but it was no use. It needed to burn itself out. Following the destruction of the city, Logan and the rest of Sherman's columns marched toward North Carolina. They came to a large stream, swollen from the horrible rains. Logan's pioneers attempted to make a way for the wagons to cross the waterway, but they began to bicker with Howard's engineers, so much so that nothing got done. Logan requested that Howard withdraw his engineers, but Howard simply said that Logan would obey every lawful order. It took days for the stream to get low enough for them to cross. In mid-March, one wing of Sherman's army made contact with what was left of the Confederate Army of Tennessee at Bentonville, North Carolina. Logan could hear the sounds of battle and rushed to attack the rebels. He found himself attacking the flank and rear of the enemy army, in a perfect spot to destroy them. By the time the corps was up, weather delays prevented him from attacking in force, and when he was ready, he found the Confederates in his front gone. Near Bentonville, Logan encountered a planter claiming to be a British subject, asking for Logan's protection. The Union general responded, "What the hell then are you doing here if you are? The boys will take every hog and chicken you have, though you are a British subject. British subject be hanged." Logan moved to Raleigh, where a flurry of messages met him. Richmond had been evacuated by Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia, and Grant's army was given chase. On April 11th, Logan received word that Lee had surrendered to Grant. This prompted Sherman to begin negotiations with Joseph E. Johnston, the commander of the Army of Tennessee. On April 17th, Logan received word that Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. Many Union soldiers were irate at the news when Sherman announced it. A mob of Federal soldiers formed to take revenge by burning the city of Raleigh. Logan got word of the mob and rode in front of them, telling them to stop and threatening to turn the artillery on them with canister if they didn't turn back. The mob dispersed and Raleigh was saved from destruction. Sherman met with his generals about surrender terms offered to the Confederates. Logan was the most vocal when it came to accepting surrender on almost any terms. He declared that the men were too tired for another pursuit, and if one of the conditions was that Confederate President Jefferson Davis could run away, let him do it. After Johnston surrendered, Sherman ordered his army to march to Washington, D.C. Logan moved into Virginia and camped at Petersburg, Virginia for a couple of days. He wrote to Mary, "There is no more necessity for troops south, more than small numbers in each state. These people are thoroughly whipped." Sherman's army wasn't allowed to explore Richmond when they came to it. Guards from the Army of the Potomac blocked the Western troops from entering the city until it was ready to march through all at one time. Howard, the Army of the Tennessee commander, was assigned to command the Freedmen's Bureau, which took him away from that army. Logan was named the new commander of the army, the one that had been taken away from him months earlier. He wrote to Mary, "General Howard has been assigned to the Bureau, and I am told that I am to command the army, but God knows I am sure I shall not ask it, as I have been treated so once before. I have nothing to expect at the hands of these men." Howard, it seemed, would lead the army into Washington, D.C. for the grand review. Sherman, sensing the tension, asked Howard to let Logan lead the army in the review. Howard said that he had led the army since Atlanta and had the right to lead it. Sherman replied, "I know it, but it will be everything to Logan to have this opportunity. Howard, you are a Christian and won't mind such a sacrifice." Howard stepped aside and let Logan lead the army. On May 24th, the Westerners began their march through the capital with thousands gathered to watch the heroes of Shiloh, Vicksburg, Chattanooga, and Atlanta. Leading the column came Logan, who was recognized, along with Blair, as former congressman and applauded wildly. Grant's aide, Horace Porter, saw Logan, Black Jack, riding at the head of the Army of the Tennessee, his swarthy coal-black hair giving him the air of a native chief. Most watchers greeted Logan with hurrahs, but one observer thought Howard looks finely with his one arm, and General Logan, with Indian blood in his veins, very little of anything else, I should think. After the review, a newspaperman declared, "The great display is over. Sherman's two armies, the most superb material ever molded into soldiers, have passed in review." The majority of Logan's force in the Army of the Tennessee was Westerners, so he moved the army to Louisville to start the process of discharging those thousands of men. Before he himself left for Louisville, he went to New York City with Francis Blair, Sherman, and Grant. They spoke at the Cooper Institute, where Logan endorsed President Andrew Johnson and his views towards Reconstruction. He then proceeded to Louisville, where he spent all of June and July discharging soldiers, but many just wanted to go home, and they began to cause a stir as they awaited their papers. Fights broke out and vandalism persisted until Logan forbade soldiers from entering the city proper to keep them out of trouble. In late July, he made a speech in Louisville to the Kentuckians about the 13th Amendment. He asked them to accept the amendment to the Constitution that would outlaw slavery. The opposers to the amendment declared those who supported it as people who wanted equality between the races. Logan assured them that the amendment didn't mean equality, just an end to slavery. He himself didn't believe the two races were equal. Logan attempted to make the process of releasing the soldiers a quick one because Mary was pregnant and due any day. So he worked tirelessly to send the men home. His farewell address said in part, "The profound gratification I feel in being authorized to release you from the onerous obligations of the camp and return you laden with laurels to homes where warm hearts wait to welcome you, is somewhat embittered by the painful reflection that I am sundering to the ties that trials have made true. Although I have been but a short period your commander, we are not strangers. Affections have sprung up between us during those long years we have passed through together." On July 24th, Mary gave birth to a 13-pound boy that they named Manning Alexander Logan. Logan rushed to his wife's side, arriving there on July 28th. It wasn't long before the War Department called on him to report for duty. Logan responded by sending them his resignation, which was accepted, although the Secretary of War hated to lose, as he said, so gallant and patriotic a soldier. Logan wasted no time in getting back into politics. Although he didn't make political speeches for any party, he watched the political currents to find out which political party might be the most advantageous to him. He left Marion, Illinois, while he traveled to New York in October to speculate in cotton and stocks. He also spent time in Washington to monitor its politics. He felt that his reputation in the war would help him gain the U.S. Senate seat from Illinois coming up in 1866. He also helped to form the Society of the Army of the Tennessee to keep a fraternal connection between that army's enlistees and commanders. While in the Northeast, he made speeches supporting Union men and the Union Party. He stated, "It has been decided, according to the doctrine of Andrew Jackson, that the sovereignty of the United States is paramount. The Union Party, what is it? Is it mere Republican or Democrat or abolition? No, it is not this limited. It is that party which, organized in the hour of the nation's peril, preserved it till the safety was secure." In November, Johnson offered him the position of minister to the Republic of Mexico, but Logan had his eyes set firmly on that Senate seat from Illinois and wouldn't accept the position. Plus, others and maybe Logan himself felt that his name was just a tool to fight back against the French regime of Maximilian, who fought for control of the country. When he refused to go to Mexico, Johnson offered him the position of minister to Japan, but Logan wouldn't budge. Family troubles emerged in the Logan household as Mary despaired at ever making Logan happy enough to stay home. She wrote, "I have struggled for 10 years with an untiring devotion to help you and be all you wanted. I loved my home and tried by might and main to make it pleasant the short visits you have made to it, but failing to make it tolerable scarcely to you, as you well know, my darling, you have never spent an evening with me and made me feel you were happy. You have been an excitement for so long, a quiet domestic home has no charm for you. Alas, like all my past anticipations of pleasure, it is all over, and so I will give up and do the best I can." Logan assured her that he would be coming home soon, but campaigning was foremost in his mind. In the summer of 1866, Logan made his big debut as a Republican. He was disgusted at the introduction of ex-Confederates into Washington, D.C., and felt abandoned by the Democratic Party because of its peace element during the war, a war he fought in bravely and helped win for the Union. He metaphorically waved the bloody shirt, accusing the Democrats of attempting to tear the country apart because of their support for the Confederacy. He aided in the creation of the Grand Army of the Republic, or GAR. He saw it as a political tool that could help him get elected. When the Illinois GAR had their first state meeting, he hoped to be named its state commander, but that honor went to John M. Palmer, another Corps commander during the Atlanta campaign. The Republican Party of Illinois nominated him for a seat in the House of Representatives. Logan accepted the nomination, believing that his nomination would help him get a seat in the Senate. By this point, he was firmly against President Johnson and declared, when all things were created, in the creation it was necessary to have animals for all kind of work, and when the Almighty looked around for a demagogue, he found Andrew Johnson and made him. The congressional race saw Logan wave the bloody shirt on every occasion he could to label his Democratic opponent as a traitor. However, the Democrats had a secret weapon. Logan's family was mostly still Democrats, and during one of his debates, his sister stood up and declared that Logan aided her husband in support for the Confederacy, before Logan officially enlisted in the Union Army. Logan couldn't spend time refuting the claim, but he knew he had to fight back, so Mary took on the role of fact-checker and got prominent Southern Illinois pro-Confederate citizens to vouch for Logan's innocence on those accusations. Logan handily won the seat, and he went to Washington to take his place in Congress, representing a different party than he had in 1861. This became a defining moment for Logan and ushered him into a new era of his political life. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. In Logan's new role as Republican congressman, he, along with the other Republicans, attempted to take away the president's power of control and Reconstruction by trying to pass laws to that effect. He also began to take an interest in civil rights for African Americans. He cast a vote in support of allowing African Americans to hold office in the District of Columbia. In the fall of 1867, Logan went to Ohio to promote Republican candidates. When he spoke, crowds of up to 20,000 gathered. For this tour of the Buckeye State, Logan shortened his speeches to around 2 hours instead of his normal 4. In those speeches, he promoted African American voting rights. He stated, "Now I want some Democrat to give a reason why the black man should not vote. I have read their speeches, and all they say is we don't want the blacks to vote, and turn up their noses as they say it. But they are made the same as you and I. But they are black, that is all the difference. If they are not made by the hand of God, I would like to know by whom they were made." His civil rights speeches weren't received as well as he had hoped. The old Northwest Territory still didn't want to support black suffrage. Although Ohio put a Republican former Union general in as governor in the form of Rutherford B. Hayes, the state legislature went decidedly for the Democrats. In January 1868, Logan fulfilled one of his greatest aspirations, becoming commander of the Grand Army of the Republic. Although he valued the camaraderie of the group, its national expansion meant that he carried a lot of political power by being its commander. As Logan returned to Congress in 1868, Andrew Johnson gave him a present by firing the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. This violated the Tenure of Office Act passed by Congress, and this brought on the impeachment of Johnson. Stanton, under the advice of the Radicals, barricaded himself in his office, refusing to leave. Logan joined him in the barricaded office. Days after violating that act, Congress worked at a rapid pace to bring charges against the president, something that hadn't happened in the nation's history. There had been impeachment of judges and other office holders, but not the president. Logan took a prominent role in the impeachment and was a member of the group of men who laid out the impeachment to the Senate. Amid the turmoil of the Johnson impeachment, Logan turned his attention to matters in the GAR. On May 5, 1868, he issued General Orders No. 11, establishing May 30th as the annual date for the purpose of strewing flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country. Although his wife Mary claimed Logan got the idea from her visit to Petersburg and seeing the Confederate graves, it most likely came from Logan's own participation in a similar ceremony in April 1866. On May 30th, ceremonies were held to lay flowers on the graves of fallen Union soldiers. Logan would later say, "It was the proudest act of my life." This Decoration Day would become Memorial Day, still celebrated today. At the end of May 1868, Logan attended the Republican National Convention in Chicago, Illinois, and he was granted the honor of nominating Ulysses S. Grant as the Republican candidate for the presidency in the November election. In that election, not only did Grant win the presidency, but Logan returned to Congress. There he continued the Republican causes, but took a particular interest in the West. The Transcontinental Railroad would be completed in May 1869, and Logan sat on the Committee on the Pacific Railroads. He was a huge proponent of Manifest Destiny, labeling Native Americans as uncivilized and only worthy of help if they were Christianized and agreed to obey U.S. laws. Logan also probably helped his friend and brother-in-law, Cyrus Thomas, to be appointed the entomologist for the 1869 U.S. Geological and Geographical Survey of the Territories. When the expedition returned, they produced the first scientific and photographic report of the Yellowstone Basin, which prompted Congress to create Yellowstone National Park in 1872. At the end of 1869, Logan voted to readmit Georgia, Texas, and Mississippi as states, but opposed Virginia. He feared that the Old Dominion would amend its constitution as soon as it came back into the Union in order to oppress blacks, so a compromise was reached to readmit Virginia only if it gave an oath that it wouldn't change the Constitution in that way. A proposal that never made it out of the committee that Logan introduced was removal of the United States Capitol from Washington, D.C. to St. Louis. He argued that since the United States now stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific, that the nation needed a more centrally located capital. This proposal never made it off the ground. In Logan's post-war life, he became more religious, officially joining the Methodist Church. Christianity and faith now figured prominently in his speeches. He even gave up his longtime vice of playing poker. However, he didn't even decline in his use of profanity, which came out especially when he got heated over a topic. His other vice, smoking, was greatly reduced as he aged. He always carried cigars, but usually gave them away rather than smoke them. As he got older, alcohol sickened him, so he mostly abstained from drinking. He didn't care for the temperance movement, though. He explained, "There is no use in trying to law men's craving for whiskey out of existence, but the majority of decent people in a community have the right, for the sake of personal comfort, to say that the indecent minority must behave themselves." One of Logan's most controversial moves in Congress was his trimming of the United States Army, already incredibly small following the Civil War. He got rid of many officers in both the Army and the Navy, and reduced the pay of generals like William T. Sherman, an action that angered Sherman incredibly. In early 1871, Logan achieved his dream of becoming a U.S. Senator from Illinois. Mary's help in this election can't be overstated. She worked just as hard or more so to get her husband elected. Logan's opponent, Richard Oglesby, met Mary Logan, and when she said he should have called on her earlier, he responded, "Well, madam, the fact is that I'm afraid to subject myself to your blandishments. You are making trouble here. I am afraid I might leave your presence a Logan man." Mary was great at her job, and Logan won the election. With Grant as president, Logan butted heads with the new commander-in-chief despite their close friendship during the war. Logan supported the Cuban rebels, who were fighting at the time a year-long war with Spain. Grant didn't want to get involved and halted Logan's proposals to assist the Cubans. Logan also suspected that Grant was lining the pockets of his friends by controlling the government contracts for Seneca Stone and called Grant out on it. These actions and others made a rift between Grant and Logan in these post-war years. It wouldn't be long before Logan got back in Grant's good graces, though. Two factions of the Republican Party emerged in this post-war era, the liberal Republicans and the radical Republicans. Logan voted along both factions' platforms, but never quite fully adopted one side or the other. When Grant ran for president for a second time, the liberal Republicans attempted to oust Grant from the presidency. Logan stumped for Grant, and when Grant won, Logan and Grant renewed their friendship. Logan seemingly abandoned his constituency that helped him toward political goals by moving he and his family out of southern Illinois to Chicago. Barely a month into their new residence, the Great Chicago Fire broke out, but miraculously the Logans were spared. Logan commented, "I have been amid the battle roar where armies, 100,000 strong, were struggling in fierce conflict for victory, where the smoke of the combat rose in heavy clouds above us, where the dead and dying lay thick on every side, but never yet have I beheld such a scene of despair and wild confusion as this, and may God grant that I shall never see the like again." Although he had a house in Chicago now, he didn't stay in it much. He remained in Washington in a rented boarding house. While in Washington, he regularly exercised, being trained by a former professional fighter. The trainer stated that Logan was powerful and a hard and quick hitter during their sparring sessions. One day they worked out in a spare room at Strathmore Arms, where they boxed with lace gloves. Senator Oglesby was the lone spectator. He was treated to quite a show. 3 rounds of boxing left both trainer and student winded, but they went on. Professor Collins began to best Logan in the 4th round with telling punches, but the senator avoided his trainer's strongest blows. Growing impatient, Collins rushed Logan, who nailed him with an uppercut, striking him perfectly under the chin. The punch sent Collins up and over a large armchair behind him. Dazed and a bit embarrassed, Collins came back with a vengeance. A flurry of punches followed, each man trading blows with the other. Oglesby tried to stop it but failed. Both men punched themselves out. Logan entered the Senate that day with 2 black eyes, earning the permanent respect from his teacher, who confirmed the claim of another senator that Logan could turn a handspring with ease. Collins called Logan the best man in every respect that I ever saw, and that means a good deal when you are speaking of fighting. Despite his robust behavior, Logan's health was failing somewhat. His rheumatism was intensifying, an ailment he attributed to the cold nights outside of Fort Donelson. The wound he received at that battle still bothered him from time to time, and the combination of problems forced him to stay in the boarding house for days. He made good use of his time, though, writing 2 plays, one called The Narrow Escape and another called The Boarding House. As his health failed, so did his wealth. He didn't live extravagantly, but he did live beyond his means. He sold property and attempted to increase his income. He even supported a bill to raise the pay of congressmen, which would benefit himself. Congressional pay hadn't increased since 1853, but the public didn't see it as fair for Congress to give themselves money while they suffered through the financial crisis of 1873. The bill to raise his pay failed. His troubles increased when a newspaper broke a story about corruption in Congress in which Logan was involved. The Union Pacific Railroad created a sham company called Credit Mobilier, which diverted profits and defrauded the government, as well as selling unrestricted stocks to politicians, Logan among them. Fortunately for Logan, he had the wherewithal to not attempt to cover up his role in the purchasing of stocks and return the dividend check as well as the interest accrued. Although he was implicated in the scandal, he was exonerated by an investigation. A newspaper also accused him of being included in the whiskey ring scandal, where through faulty measuring of whiskey, distillers defrauded the government of potential revenue, but no evidence could be conclusive to link Logan to the scandal. Nevertheless, some newspapers implicated him in it. Logan invested in a silver mine in Colorado to hopefully restore his wealth, but when a dispute erupted between a nearby mining operation, the conflict resulted in ambushes and murders. When the man who ran Logan's mine met an early death, the land was sold, and Logan lost all of his investment. In the election of 1876, a controversy emerged. The Republican Rutherford B. Hayes and the Democrat Samuel Tilden didn't receive the required number of electoral votes to become president. 3 states were contested. To help solve this situation, a committee made up of 4 Republican and 3 Democrat senators was formed. Logan only stayed on the committee a short while before heading to Illinois. He was much more concerned about his own election, which seemed to be going wrong. He couldn't get the requisite number of legislators to vote for him, so the Republican Party pulled his name. It didn't do any good. David Davis, the Democratic candidate, then received enough votes and went in as the new senator from Illinois. However, this had an impact on the presidential election as well. Davis, until elected by Illinois legislators for the Senate seat, had been a Supreme Court judge and sat on a 15-member electoral commission to decide which set of electoral returns would be accepted from each of the 3 states that submitted them. When a Republican went in as the new member, the tide turned for Hayes becoming president. For 10 years, Logan had been in Washington as either a member of the House or the Senate. He was unaccustomed to being anything else except for a battlefield general. Ulysses S. Grant put it best when he said, "Logan is never at peace, except in war."
As always, if you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. When Logan lost his Senate seat, he lost his main source of income, leading to a stressful time in his life as he tried to live the same lifestyle that he had previously. By no means was he rich, but he lived beyond his means, which brought him to a financial crisis. He traveled to Denver, Colorado to speculate in a gold mine, attempting to invest in a get-rich-quick scheme, but none were to his liking. He traveled back to Illinois and sold some of his land in the southern part of the state, and to make ends meet, he reopened his law practice. The enthusiasm for law had dwindled in Logan. Gone were the thrilling days of riding the circuit. Nevertheless, Logan used that profession to keep himself afloat financially. President Rutherford B. Hayes offered him a job as ambassador to a foreign country, but like all the other similar offers, he turned it down. He was determined to get back into politics in the United States. Richard Oglesby's seat in the U.S. Senate was coming up, and Logan was determined to grab it for himself despite Oglesby wanting to keep it. Logan started up his political machine, using his power as a state political boss to start grabbing up voters, especially the veteran vote. Mary began to campaign for her husband, convincing legislators and other politicians to put their support and vote behind Logan. Blackjack won the seat and made a triumphant return into Washington, D.C., greeted by the formerly enslaved Frederick Douglass. After his time as the President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant and his wife embarked on a world tour. When they returned, the American public clamored for Grant, forgetting the political scandals that encompassed his presidency. Many politicians supported Grant for an unprecedented third term as president. Logan was one of his biggest supporters for this additional term. As a U.S. Senator, Logan began to build a solid block of Republicans dedicated to putting Grant up as the Republican presidential nominee in the next election. One of the most important moments during this stint in the Senate for Logan was a bill that was introduced to reinstate the defamed Union General Fitzjohn Porter and give him back pay following a court-martial during the Civil War. Logan protested against Porter ever being reinstated or gaining any kind of dignity after his disobedience of orders that landed him in a court-martial in the first place. Logan delivered a 10-hour speech, split up over 4 days, denouncing Porter. The bill failed partially as a result of Logan's arguments and tirades against the former Union general, but later on Porter would become reinstated. Meanwhile, support for Grant as president built. Logan and other supporters of Grant would become known as the Stalwarts during this push for a third term. On April 16, 1880, in the Central Music Hall in Chicago, Illinois, Logan delivered a rousing speech supporting Grant. In it, he stated, "We are told we must have a plumed knight for president this time. In the person of U.S. Grant, we offer you the grandest knight who ever waved a plume or thrust a lance. He won his decoration on the field of battle. At the head of his brave Union Legion, he crushed the most audacious armies that ever waged war against their country. His plume is recognized as the symbol of constitutional liberty and equality by every man, woman, and child in the land. The orphans of the Union soldiers recognize it. The widow of Union martyrs recognize it. And the blind Union veterans touch it that they may be thrilled by the patriotic memories associated with it." Logan used Grant's presidential run to refight the Civil War. Former Confederates could be found in the halls of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and it disgusted Logan that someone he fought against was now making legislation alongside him. He metaphorically waved the bloody shirt of Union soldiers in the air as he delivered impassioned speeches denouncing those who stood in the way of a Grant presidency. During the county and state Republican conventions, Logan used his pull to get Grant supporters named as delegates to the National Convention. In an attempt to gain as many votes for Grant as possible, Logan convinced the delegates to the state's convention to agree to vote as one block, but when they got to the National Convention, the convention overturned that rule, allowing each delegate to vote individually. During the convention, Grant held his own, staying a solid frontrunner through numerous ballots against the other two most popular candidates, James Blaine and John Sherman. However, it all came tumbling down for Logan when both Blaine and Sherman's names were withdrawn. With those two men out of the running, it allowed for a dark horse candidate, James Garfield, to grab the necessary amount of votes. After the convention, Logan agreed to support Garfield as president, but he personally didn't care for him. Logan thought Garfield unmanly when he heard that when Garfield found out he was being investigated in the Credit Mobilier scandal years earlier, that he broke down and cried. Logan felt that a man should own up to his mistakes and take responsibility. To cry over such an action was too feminine. Nevertheless, Logan stumped for Garfield throughout Illinois and Indiana, rousing up support from everyone he could muster. The Democratic opponent was also a Civil War general, Winfield Scott Hancock. The bloody shirt that Logan waved in previous elections wouldn't work as well against the popular Hancock, who also took a bullet for the Union, just like Logan. In the end, Garfield won with less than 10,000 votes, but the Electoral College vote was a much wider margin, with Garfield getting 214 to Hancock's 155. Garfield considered Logan for a cabinet position, but Logan didn't want it. However, he did counsel Garfield in selecting a cabinet member. Logan recommended Abraham Lincoln's only surviving child, Robert Todd Lincoln, as the Secretary of War. Garfield agreed to the recommendation. Logan attended Garfield's inauguration and then began his responsibilities as a U.S. Senator. Just a week or two after the inauguration, as Logan was getting dressed to attend Congress, he walked into his reception room at his boarding house and was startled by an unannounced visitor sitting in a chair by the door. The man was oddly dressed, rubber galoshes with no stockings on his feet, no coat, and very light pants for the late winter season. The man claimed to be one of Logan's constituents and wanted him to sign a recommendation that the strange man had written to become Garfield's consul general to France. Logan treated him kindly, but ushered him out of his room. The next morning, the strange man returned. Again, Logan removed him from his home. After getting rid of him for the second time, Logan pulled his landlady aside and pointed out the man, telling her that he didn't need to be hanging around the boarding house. As the strange man sat at a table eating, she asked why. Logan said, "I think he is a little off in the head." He knew little about the man except his name, Charles Guiteau. Logan summered in his Chicago home with Mary, and it was there that he received the news from Robert Todd Lincoln that President Garfield had been shot by Charles Guiteau. The president would linger for a few months, but died. Chester A. Arthur took over as president. Logan's health continued to deteriorate with attacks of rheumatism confining him to his room. He did, however, find enough strength one day to engage in a bit of sport with some young men target practicing. They were shooting at glass bottles, and Logan wanted to show them how horrible of an aim they were. Logan bet boxes of cigars that he was a better shot than they were. The young men took the old general's bet. Logan declared that he would start shooting at 12 bottles, and he would continue until he missed one. The first shot landed, as well as the next 11, displaying to the young men that Logan hadn't lost the ability to deliver a good volley. Since the 1870s, the Logans had been grandparents. Their daughter Dorothy, although they always called her Dolly, lived in Chicago in the family home. Their son Manning officially changed his name to John A. Logan II in honor of his father. Logan also got his son an appointment to West Point in 1883. An ironic move since Blackjack had been treated as substandard during the war for being a volunteer and not professionally trained. Logan's finances didn't improve. He had to subsist on his $5,000 a year salary from the Senate. However, he always fed his book addiction. His personal library contained over 5,000 volumes, from classics to historical works. He tried to curtail his family's spending and lectured Mary on being frugal with their money. However, one day, as Logan attended the Senate, Mary found a delivery man at the door with $300 worth of books. Logan knew the books would be delivered that day and purposefully stayed out late to delay the confrontation with his wife. He came home to find the books lined up in the home with Mary standing by them. Logan said, "I know I have been foolish, but I could not resist them when I dropped by Loudermilk's for a few moments." Blackjack and Mary traveled to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where their daughter and son-in-law were stationed. There, Logan had to put out another political fire. He and his son-in-law, Will Tucker, were accused of pushing members of the Zuni tribe off their land by claiming water rights on the reservation. Logan denied it, but President Arthur used an executive order to force Logan's son-in-law off the land. While he was out west, he, as a senator, participated in the Dawes Commission in assessing the Sioux Indian tribe, meeting with Sitting Bull. Logan told the chief that, "The Great Father has appointed you chief, but if not for the government, you would be starving to death in the mountains." Also out west, he visited Yellowstone National Park, a location he helped create by helping to form the U.S. Geological Survey of the region. At the end of 1883 and into early 1884, the call for Logan to be the Republican presidential nominee grew. Logan relished the thought of being elected president and began to work towards that end. Grant even threw his support to Logan in March 1884. At the Republican National Convention, Logan's name was thrown into the hat, but he garnered just around 60 votes, compared to the other leading candidates' 300 or so votes. James Blaine was in the lead against John Sherman and President Arthur, and in that, Logan found a silver lining. If he could shift his votes to Blaine, then he could put him over the top. Logan could then be named the vice presidential nominee. Following Blaine's official nomination, Logan was chosen as his running mate. Logan began a fast-paced campaign schedule, delivering 6 to 15 speeches a day, except Sundays, which he took off. None went over 45 minutes, and some went as short as 5 minutes. But if it wasn't for Mary, he would have soon become ragged. As soon as he finished a speech, she whisked him off the stage and took him to a room where she rubbed a whiskey-based ointment on his chest and made him drink hot lemonade, all to keep him from getting hoarse and becoming ill. In November, Logan and Blaine ran against Grover Cleveland. 2 things went against them. Probably the most important was that the Mugwumps, or the independent Republicans, put their support behind the Democratic candidates when they became disgusted by the Republican choices. The second important thing that sealed the deal for Cleveland's victory was that Blaine attended a campaign rally where one of the fellow speakers let loose a tirade toward the Irish and Catholics, upsetting that population in the important state of New York. Cleveland won, ending a 24-year streak of Republican victories. Logan was devastated. When Logan was interviewed about the loss, he answered with an Abraham Lincoln anecdote about a man who stubbed his toe. Logan said, "I'm too big to cry, and it hurts too bad for me to laugh." Logan didn't let the defeat get him down for too long. He now needed to keep his Senate seat since he wouldn't be the vice president. However, there was a problem. The state legislators who voted for the Senate were deadlocked, with neither party having the necessary votes. The deadlock drug on for months, but during that time 3 Democratic legislators died. 2 came from heavy Democratic districts, but 1 didn't. So the Republicans decided to get another legislator on their side by doing a still hunt. Republican operatives, disguised as stock buyers, insurance agents, sewing machine agents, and other professionals that gave them acceptable explanations to be in the region, began to honeycomb all the school districts in the 4 counties where they handed trustworthy Republican tickets with William H. Weaver's name on it. Sworn to secrecy, each of these chosen Republicans magnified the vote potential several-fold by selecting up to 5 more clandestine Republicans to carry out the plan. Thousands of tickets were quietly distributed. Each recipient was fed specific instructions not to go to the polls earlier than 3 p.m. and no later than 5 p.m. on May 6th. Only at that time were they to cast their votes in an effort to catch the Democrats entirely off guard. The plan worked as the Democrats had grown too complacent, and they didn't have time to react to the influx of Republican votes. Logan won a seat in the U.S. Senate for the 3rd time. Soon after his election, Logan went to see one of his biggest supporters, and dying friend, Ulysses S. Grant. They reminisced about the war and politics, and Logan left with even more respect for the old general. On the night of June 12, 1885, at the Washington home of the Logans, the African American community gathered to celebrate the election of Logan to the Senate. His fight for civil rights garnered their respect and love, and they wanted to show him how much he meant to them. Logan came out of his home and addressed the crowd. He told them that they have been known in this country for long years past as a downtrodden race. Whatever I have been able to do to elevate them and give them the rights that belong to every citizen has always been done. They are men, they are American citizens, and they are entitled to all rights that any other man and American citizen is entitled to. At the end of his short speech, he welcomed as many of them as could pass through his home to come through so he could thank each one of them personally. Over 1,000 African Americans walked into the Logan home and clasped hands with the general. Also that summer, Logan paid one more visit to his friend, Ulysses S. Grant. He acted as one of the pallbearers for his funeral. Before the congressional session began, Logan tried to write a book centered around slavery's role in the coming of the Civil War, called The Great Conspiracy. He toiled every day to meet a strict timetable, hoping to complete it before returning to the Senate. Only revisions were needed by the time he returned to the Capitol Dome. When it was published, it wasn't well received, and the sales were lackluster. But he didn't have time to dwell on that problem, as he needed to take part in Senate debates. His bill to raise the pension of wounded veterans was shot down, and a bill to investigate the progress of African Americans since the Civil War was also voted down. He voted in support of a bill that would help fight illiteracy, particularly in black communities, by building schools in underserved areas. The Senate worked hard to craft the bill, and even though the Senate passed the bill, the House of Representatives voted it down because of it targeting black children who suffered the most with illiteracy. Although The Great Conspiracy didn't take off, one book that Logan authored did, called Uncle Daniel's Story of Tom Anderson and 20 Great Battles. It was a fictitious work about the Civil War where Logan used the title character, Uncle Daniel, to tell the story. Logan changed the names of battles and people, but he essentially retells the story of his time in the war. It began gaining traction when The Great Conspiracy didn't. Logan led the initiative to create a cyclorama painting featuring the Battle of Atlanta. Logan hoped it would be ready in time for his presidential run in 1884, but delays pushed the debut of the painting back. In anticipation of being nominated by the Republican Party for the presidency in the next election, he and Mary set off for a cross-country tour, taking a train to California, where Logan was met with large crowds at San Francisco. Then he took a train and a stagecoach to Portland, Oregon, where 7,000 people came to see him. At Buttesville, he found a moment of relaxation, discovering a hammock swinging in a grape arbor. He got into the hammock and began to hum Swing Low, Sweet Chariots. All of a sudden, the hammock broke, and he came crashing down on some apples. He wasn't injured, but his pride took a hit. He rounded out the Western tour with trips to Nevada and Puget Sound. Upon returning, Logan worked feverishly to complete his third book, an argument for having an all-volunteer army instead of a professional army, entitled Volunteer Soldier of America. Mark Twain's publishing company agreed to print the book. He completed it in December 1886. Soon after its completion, Logan was struck with an attack of rheumatism that had been plaguing him for years. He was confined to a bed for a great deal of December. Then on December 22nd, he took a turn for the worse. On Christmas Eve, the doctor pronounced that Logan's illness had moved to his brain, something he called cerebral rheumatism, and he wasn't optimistic about the outcome. Logan lay in bed at his Washington home, the only home he purchased in Washington, something he had done relatively recently. The day after Christmas, the doctors said he wouldn't survive the day. He lay propped up on a plain mahogany bedstead on the second floor of the home, unconscious. His family and some of his friends, including General Philip Sheridan, surrounded him, watching each breath he took. He produced 2 guttural exhalations and breathed his last breath at 2:57 p.m. on December 26, 1886. In response to Logan's death, the formerly enslaved abolitionist Frederick Douglass wrote of John A. Logan, "It is only needed to say that he was the dread of traitors, the defender of loyal soldiers, and the true friend of the newly made citizens of the Republic. Much was predicated for our cause on this man's future. but he too, in the order of Providence, has laid off his armor. He was temporarily buried in the tomb of a family friend at Rock Creek Cemetery, but will be removed to a granite memorial in the National Cemetery of the Soldiers' Home, next to the Rock Creek burial ground. Mary Logan, the constant companion and mastermind of many of his campaigns, never remarried. On the contrary, she dedicated an entire wing of their home to her husband, putting up pictures and relics from his life on full display for anyone who visited the home. Her and their daughter would help organize the District of Columbia Society of the Dames of the Loyal Legion of the United States. Mary wrote a widely bought book entitled Reminiscences of a Soldier's Wife, which was published in 1913. She continued to keep her husband's name alive by writing articles and being a constant invited guest at Union soldier reunions. She influenced her husband's support of women's suffrage, but his bill to investigate the subject on the floor of the Senate never made it off the ground. She would continue the fight herself for the right of women to vote. She got to see the 19th Amendment passed before she passed away in February 1923. In the years following Logan's death, 5 statues were erected in his honor. The Atlanta cyclorama, which was originally titled Logan's Great Battle, no longer carries that name, but is still on display, and the state song of Illinois boasts his name in their stanzas. John A. Logan's life represents one of the great transformations in American history, which teaches us that people in the past are like us, they change over time. Logan, like all people, wasn't a stagnant figure in his ideas or actions. He started as a pro-slavery politician from southern Illinois, advocating for throwing black people out of his home state and forbidding them from entering it. When the Civil War broke out, he didn't exactly believe that secession was right, but he absolutely believed that the U.S. government shouldn't coerce the South back into the Union. He spoke against Abraham Lincoln raising an army, but when one of those armies moved into Virginia, Logan, as a U.S. congressman, fired a rifle at the Confederates at the First Battle of Bull Run, helping to change his mind about the war. He then became an advocate of suppressing the rebellion, but protested anything that resembled emancipation. However, the war changed that. Logan rose up from colonel to major general, taking part in the battles of Fort Henry and Donelson, the Vicksburg Campaign, and the Atlanta Campaign. He helped facilitate the surrender of the largest Confederate force of the war at Bennett Place in North Carolina. At the end of the war, he returned to politics, but with a different mindset and a different party. He now sat in the House and the Senate as a Republican and fought for civil rights for African Americans, promoting schools and trying to end illiteracy. He was proud of his Civil War service, waving the bloody shirt in the faces of those who fought against the Union or opposed the war. The Civil War defined him and brought about his change, and he couldn't have done all that without the support of his wife Mary, who cared for him when he was ill during the war, helped run his campaigns, proofread his writings, and took care of him. He longed for the presidency, but it eluded him. His lifestyle hurt him financially, and he became embroiled in multiple scandals, but he never let those scandals hold him back, or back down from a fight or a rebuttal to such accusations. The war that came to define him ultimately led to his demise because of the illness contracted on the fields of battle. But the one-time commander of the Army of the Tennessee, one of the Union's preeminent units, deserves recognition for his service to his country and his ability to show students of history that people in the past aren't stagnant. They change and evolve over time. He transformed from Dirty Work Logan to Blackjack Logan in the space of a couple of years, in which he solidified his role as a dedicated Union man, the founder of Memorial Day, a beloved friend of Ulysses S. Grant, and a favorite son of the state of Illinois.